Good afternoon, members, and welcome to this BCP Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting on this very hot, lovely summer's day. For those of you that are watching online, I'll introduce myself. I'm Councillor Steve Bartlett, and I'm the chair of this Overview and Scrutiny Board, and I'll be chairing this meeting today. So, first of all, we go to housekeeping. Claire, could I ask you to read out the housekeeping rules for the meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chairman. Please could everyone present follow these ground by the Chairman. If accessing via Teams, always turn on your video function when invited to speak and state your name. Please use your microphones when speaking and please mute or turn off microphones when you are not talking. If accessing via Teams and would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. Please refrain from using the chat function in Teams except for recording a proposed motion. If a vote is required on any issue, this should be done by a show of hands. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route. And finally, please could everyone ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Do we have any apologies for today's meeting?
Yes, Chairman, we've received apologies from Councillors Farr, Kelsey, Rigby, O'Neill and Councillor Dion. We also have 2 substitute members for this meeting. Councillor Borthwick is substituting for Councillor Tony O'Neill and Councillor Northover is substituting for Councillor Rigby.
Thank you very much. Members, declarations of interest. Do any members here have any declarations of interest? No. Thank you. So we'll go to, again, item 4, confirmation of minutes. I'll come to the action sheet in a moment. Anybody got any comments regarding the minutes of the meeting on the 14th of June? No? Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Slade.
Sorry, Chair. I did notice a couple of typos, which I wouldn't normally bring. Only one of them actually leaves a sentence unfinished, which means you don't understand what it means. And that is on page 3. The sentence finishes, borrowing would not be undertaken without a blank. I love blankety blank, but I could probably put something different in there than I'm sure the leader intended. And I can't remember what it was. And about 4 paragraphs down, the leader is named. And I know we normally refer to the leader, and it's as if it's a note. So I wonder if that might just be corrected for the way it works. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The action sheet. We had 3 actions from the last meeting. Well, not all from the last meeting, but the first one was this regarding the closed toilets at Pool Quay, and I undertook to write to the planning enforcement team on behalf of the board regarding when they were going to be opened. Essentially, I have had a response back from head of planning, and I'll read it out to you. It says the issue of reopening the toilets at Dolphin Quays on Pool remains work in progress by officers. We've been unable to secure the reopening of the toilets located at Dolphin Quays on Pool Quay at the present time. These toilets aren't owned by us, but are provided by a private company through a previous planning obligation. We are in talks with the private company to reopen these toilets, which unfortunately is taking longer than intended. We hope to resolve any issues soon and once again open these toilets for everyone's convenience. No pun intended there, I'm sure. There are a couple of issues and I want to come back to that, but we have a member wishing to speak on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I just think that is completely unacceptable, that response I've been getting for 2 or 3 years in relation to this. What we need to understand is what the problem is. We need to know, why the particular agreement that is in place is not enforceable, and whether it's not enforceable because of a failure of the council in some way, and if it is not enforceable, we need to have a route path to reopening or providing alternative toilets. It's not acceptable in my view just to have that wishy-washy response. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you, Councillor Howell, and indeed it opens up in my mind a broader issue, and that's about accountability and monitoring of the planning system performance, not just in terms of applications but also in terms of the enforcement processes. Now this in former Borough Council was routinely monitored at planning board meetings, and we have a quarterly report on enforcement issues. I have asked several times in various agendas if that could be reintroduced, and I think that this one example is a really good example of where things have dragged on for months, and I understand it could even have been years, and it's not getting anywhere. And you know, as you quite rightly say, ask the same question again and you get a very similar answer that you probably had a long time ago. So it's not being progressed. So I've got a proposal to make, and whilst it will include this specific item on a more general foot, I would like to see the reintroduction of performance monitoring of the planning applications and the enforcement system. And I would like to propose to make a recommendation to the portfolio holder, Councillor Broadhead, who's in charge of these things, that we do reintroduce a planning performance system back into the planning meeting on a routine basis. And I would suggest on a quarterly basis, at least for enforcement issues, and possibly even monthly in terms of planning applications. The data is there. It takes not a lot more effort to actually present it to the planning board. And so I would like to propose.
I'm happy to second that, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. So we have a proposal. We have a seconder that we introduce a planning performance system back into the planning boards. Can I ask for a vote on this, please? Unless anybody wants to speak to that again. Anybody wish to speak? Yeah, Councillor Howell.
Yeah, I agree with that, but it doesn't solve this particular issue about why we can't get the accurate information. And it's been suggested to me in the past that somebody in planning and infrastructure made a mistake in the contracting partner too much leeway in the past, and that makes it difficult for them to have any bargaining power. You know, we've got a situation here potentially where the department's covering up for its own mistakes. There must be a way that councillors can get to the truth here and understand what the real issue is.
Okay, notwithstanding the proposal I've just made, then I will additionally take an action to write again to Head of Planning to get more detailed information on this particular occurrence. Would also expect it to appear as part of the routine performance monitoring at the planning board as well. But I will write to them again to see if we can get a more satisfactory answer. If you're happy with that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So, members, we have a proposal and a seconder. Can I see a show of hands, please? Those for? Anybody against? Oh, sorry. Anybody against? Any one absent? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next one, which is the scrutiny of regeneration, economy and strategic planning related cabinet reports. Approval of the rolling five-year BDC business plan. Yes, this was regarding a statement in the plan about the BDC's contribution to affordable housing, and the portfolio holder undertook to provide further information on this issue in terms of, you know, how much affordable housing is being contributed through the BDC company. Portfolio holder, Councillor Broadhead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I did send you an email on this earlier on today with an update, although I can probably read that out. I think there is still more information. I've had an email only this morning from officers asking to pull a little bit more information together regarding Section 1.106 contributions for affordable housing. But the answer that I did provide this morning, and apologies if it was if you haven't picked it up, is that spoken to officers in the BDC who advise that there is a £1 million contribution via a commuted sum, and equally there is an intention to explore a shared equity model for Block D in the Winter Gardens if a suitable agreement can be reached with Homes England as well. So that's the kind of direct information, but I have a feeling that there's probably some additional figures to come, which I'll update you as and when I get them.
Can you just clarify the £1 million contribution? What scheme does that apply to?
I believe the £1 million is again directly applied to the planning permission granted to the Winter Garden scheme. What I'm trying to do is get more information on the past developments as well, and find out the total figure for you. It should be forthcoming shortly.
We'll move on from that one. The next one is scrutiny of community safety related cabinet reports, public spaces protection order, and this is when members requested the specific information to their own wards about the number of alcohol related antisocial behaviours, and Councillor May Haynes has fulfilled that action, and I believe she has copied the information to all the members of the board, so I don't think we really need, unless members wish to discuss it, I think that's probably met that action, and we can close that one down. Okay, all right, thank you. That brings us on to agenda item 5, which is the forward plan. Thank you, members. I'd just like to quickly go through this. Let's just, because there's a few things in here that maybe we can bottom out and maybe clear off, which have been there for quite some time. So if we go to the 23rd of August, what have we got on there? We've got the housing strategy, capital new build and acquisition strategy, and the Winter Gardens update. I think those are still on the cabinet plan, so I think those are still probably okay. Item 2, to include the scrutiny of the Community Safety Partnership annual report. I think that's still coming together, and we're not quite sure what format that's going to take. I think we need to have a bit more debate about that. And oh yes, and then we come to item 3, a transformation agenda. Now, you may remember we had a discussion about how we may be able to get a little bit more ahead of the cabinet forward plan. The transformation agenda is a very important one, but we thought we might like to approach that in a slightly different way. You know, normally we wait for a cabinet report, it comes through just before it goes to cabinet, we scrutinise the paper, but it's generally a bit too late in the process for us to do much about it, and even if we make recommendations, it's very difficult at that point for the cabinet to make changes. So what we thought we might like to do, and transformation is being one of the main drivers for the council activity at the moment, is to have what we can only describe as a select committee type approach to it, where we invite officers and then we leave it to members to actually ask them questions relevant to transformation. And for example, you know, we know that transformation agenda has got a huge impact on members of the staff. You know, they have a sword of Damocles hanging over some of these people for a number of years now. So that's one impact. They're also the other major impact on, or the potential impact on services. You know, that's another major driver. You know, what is the impact in terms of the transformation agenda on the finances of the council? Where is it leading to? You know, is it improving to improve quality of services? Is it improving? Is the thing being driven from a financial basis, or is it being driven by a need to improve our services? You know, the whole range of issues there that we thought, you know, okay, it's our concerns. We should have a free and frank discussion about where this is heading, what the status of it is. You know, what's the programme towards transformation? You know, how far down that line are we? What problems are there? You know, and what's it revealing so far? There's a whole raft of different questions, issues that come out of transformation. So rather than sort of just get a paper on it, we thought, you know, let's leave it to members. Now that's just an idea. You know, we haven't gone firm on it, but we thought we'd like to table this as a suggestion to see what the views of members were on it. And if you're up for that, and we can run this as a trial, you know, I don't know about you, but when I watched some of the Common Select Committee discussions, I'm a sad person as I am, but I do actually quite enjoy the way that members do get into some of the issues. You know, some of them are very prickly issues for the people to deal with, but they do actually get some really good, interesting outcomes from it. So the idea, of course, is not to put anybody on the spot. You know, other than the spot, it is information gathering. Can we identify any issues that we would like to prioritise or whatever? So those are the thoughts, and I'd be interested to hear your views on it. If you think it's something we can go along with, then we can agree it and we'll try it. So Councillor Cox had his hands up first.
I just wanted to clarify a format thing, because that might help. When we were speaking about this idea, we were talking about pushing the cabinet items into one of the meetings and then dedicating the other meeting to this. We also talked about doing it in the afternoon meeting so that it didn't require officers to be outside of their normal working day, and that it would be very much driven at officers as opposed to members, with the portfolio holders, of course, listening, and that we would sort of almost come up with between us a report from our transcript of the things that we felt, in the same way as the select committee would. So I wanted to make that clear, because I wasn't clear about it. If you're happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Lade. Absolutely right. The one thing I do have to point out, of course, is that it does mean that the onus will be on us to do the work. You know, we will have to think about the issue ourselves and then question the officers on it. And, you know, it's very to review the paper and that is tuck it away once you've got through it. This is really very much down to us. So it'd be interesting. Councillor Cox.
Yes, I'd just like to say I wholeheartedly support it, because as far as I'm concerned, this fulfills the second part of what we're supposed to be doing, which is overview. You know, at the moment, for the last 2 years, as far as I can see, we've been scrutinising things to hell, but not doing what we, you know, half of the job that we're supposed to do, which is overviewing and making suggestions on policy and stuff. So yes, I do wholeheartedly agree and accept.
Excellent, thank you, Councillor Cox. Anybody else wish to speak on that? Because if you're content with that, sorry, yeah, Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's a really good idea. But I think we need to find which members are happy to do this, but also perhaps, rather than have the same questions from each people, perhaps if they say what their topics that they feel that they'd like to get involved in, just to make sure that we cover most of someone might want to do housing, someone might want to do the staff, someone might want to do the services. It's just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't want to duplicate the effort, would we? You know. So yeah, Councillor Howell.
Yeah, I mean, previously when this has been done in Borough of Poole, it was quite normal for substitutes to come in. You know, if you had a councillor outside this group who had specific skill, then they would be on the working group, and then they would report to us as a committee. So I assume that would still be possible within the
I don't actually envisage this being a working group. I envisage this being the main overview and scrutiny board. So but substitutes would be allowed And of course, members are also allowed to participate overview and scrutiny board, as indeed we have today with Councillor Trent, who's going to be talking about his concerns about highways. So yeah, there is an opportunity for everyone to be involved if they wish to. Okay, thank you. It looks as if we're in agreement on that, and so we'll move on. For the 29th of September, we've got at the moment, we've got the review of the multi-partner summer response plan, which we haven't seen yet.
Can I just say, I thought we were going to move that back because it's only a week after the air festival report.
Yes.
I think we suggested doing that in October.
Yep, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think we should do that. Think about that. Maybe we should move it back, either to October or November. Maybe we can just discuss it.
I think there is a beachfront strategy paper coming in October anyway, whether we could theme that together. I can't remember when that was returning.
Yeah.
It is October. I think it's intended for October, all being well.
Okay. In that case, we'll put it in October. So I think we probably need to think then a bit more about what's happening in September. So I don't think we have anything else lined up for it at the moment. If members are content, as I said, I'm always saying this, please write and let us know about the things that you want to us to scrutinise or overview. And we do try to align it with the Cabinet plan as best we possibly can. But we may have to come back to you before September, possibly, just to get your views on a few things that we may wish to suggest. So for 15th of November, what have we got coming up there? Update on update report on the future of planning in Bournemouth, which is if you remember, it will be an update on something we did earlier in the year to see how they're getting on with improving the planning system.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify that I think we agreed that was a typo and that should say the future of planning in BCP and not in Bournemouth?
Correct. Thank you. Yeah, that's the only one we've got at the moment in November. I can't recall anything else off the top of my head. And as you can see, we tried to push the plan out a little bit further this time. And again, and that reflects what we're seeing in the Cabinet plan, which is now being pushed out to, into the future quite a bit. This green credentials, an annual report on the Council's progress to assess our performance against target in respect of the climate change. Yes, there is an annual report on this. Councillor Slade, I think you may wish to say something on this before you put your hand up. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. We discussed, the Chair and I discussed whether it is better for us to have the annual report come to scrutiny when it's pretty much decided and it is a backward-looking report, or whether this would be an opportunity for us to allow the report to go through as it's backward-looking, and then in January actually hold a proper scrutiny day based upon the climate plan going forward, where we can bring in external people, whether it be the Dorset Climate Action, Friends of the Earth, community groups, and actually look at where we are is where we are, but actually where are we going? Because once it actually gets, once Councillor Green has produced a paper for Cabinet, it's not going to look radically different because we took a look at it, but actually we could look at it in January and say, well, that's the report of where we are. This is where the wider council thinks it might be worth going with. So we talked about having whole scrutiny days and bringing in witnesses and other people. This felt like an opportunity to perhaps start the new year with a new way of working, perhaps with some external support if that's what we needed from LGA peers or whatever was appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, I don't have any problem with that, and I think we should welcome any particularly new ways of thinking in terms of the way we do everything on scrutiny. I just would like a bit more time to consider the detail of how we administer that day and whether we need a whole day or whether we could accommodate it within an afternoon session in the same way that we're proposing to do for for the transformation program we've just been discussing. But I think if members are in principle agreed to that, and I think it's a good suggestion, then that's what we'll do. Anybody like to speak on that? No, it seems like we're in dramatic agreement then. Excellent. So we'll put that down for January in terms of a review, but that doesn't mean to say we won't be looking at the paper in December, presumably. We'll still be looking at that paper. Okay. Okay, we have under commission work the working group, Economy and Tourism Impact of COVID-19. Now, that's been on there. The intention was, I think, to establish a working group very, very early on, and it never really happened. We ended up getting a number of presentations from the portfolio holder responsible for the COVID-19 measures. The working group never met, and I'm not sure whether we need to continue with this particular item. I certainly don't think we need to set up a separate working group. Anybody got any thoughts on that? It appears not, in which case I'm going to suggest that we remove that item from the forward plan. Everyone happy with that? Agree? Any dissent? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, going to items previously agreed by the board for pre-cabinet decision scrutiny. We have the pay and reward strategy. This goes back to something that was decided in September 2019. Now, the pay and reward strategy will form part of transformation. It's a big element of it, in fact. Sorry, Councillor Slade.
I believe when I had a transformation briefing a week or two ago, I'm fairly sure that the pay and reward element has been delayed a little bit further because it had to move the estate element forward. So I wonder whether actually, from my understanding, I don't think it'd be appropriate to talk about it much at transformation because this is people, the unions and staff representatives would need to be sort of quite heavily involved. I wonder if that might be something we can sort of almost say we don't need to look at it again for 6 months, because I'm pretty sure that the service improvement implementation partner, strategic implementation partner said that this is quite a long way down the line. So it might simply be that we just park it for
I think we should. I think we should take off the forward plan for the time being. But in terms of your comment about transformation and pay and reward strategy and unions, I think the transformation issue, again, it's something that we could involve the unions in, and I think that Okay, so we will take that item off the forward plan. Right, going on to other items previously agreed by the board, we've got the Lansdowne digital pilot, and if you remember, this stems back to the potential for 5G transmissions and damage that may be caused, etc., etc. And as part of Smart Places programme, it was agreed to set up a trial in the Lansdowne area for 5G. And there are actually some recording devices. There are 3 actually in the Lansdowne itself, and there's another one at the Sovereign Centre in Old Christchurch Road in Polscombe. And these have been operational now since certainly January, and I think the latest one came online in February for Polscombe. And they do record all the EMF transmissions emissions that you get. The bit of the puzzle that I haven't been able to determine is whether it's actually been measuring any 5G emissions, because the plan was due for the 5G network to be in place by the end, I think, 2020. So it may be that the data I'm looking at does include 5G transmissions. But fortunately, we've got Councillor Broadhead with us today, so I'm hoping that he might be able to elucidate on this matter. Councillor Broadhead, can you tell us, have we actually been transmitting 5G in those areas?
Don't quote me on this, Chairman, but I'm pretty sure that we are. I know that as you pointed out, the live monitoring of the transmissions has been going on, I think, pretty much since we switched it on, because obviously you can't monitor it if it's not switched on. I know we've got a number of businesses already utilising the closed network that we've got there, because I think they're pretty much the first area certainly in the country, if not in the UK, to offer a 5G network which anybody can come and use, but it's not a public one. So I'm absolutely sure it is up and running, but I'm sure I'll get messages if that's not quite the case.
Okay, I mean, on that basis then, I think, the fact is that the trial has been set up, the recording devices are there. They're open for any member of the public to look at any time. And so on that basis, I think we will now take this off of the forward plan.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, sorry.
Before you move on, further on, we've got the scrutiny on digital. There's no reason why we wouldn't include this within that anyway. So I think we take it off as a separate item. It could be rolled in.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Item 6, review of leisure centre management. Now, this talks about agree to receive information the consultants appointed to undertake leisure centres services review prior to its report back to the cabinet. Well, I think recently we've had some interim extensions to contracts, etc., to continue with the leisure centres for some time. So I think for the time being, whilst we will do this, comes through as a policy. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So I think we can actually take this off for the time being, because it will come back again as a matter of policy in terms of what we're going to do with the leisure centre. We don't know yet, and it's going to be for some time now before we actually get around to it, given the extensions to contracts that the incumbents have now been given to see us through for the next, I think it's probably 2 years. I can't remember. Yeah, 3, is it? 3 years. Okay. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I'm just slightly concerned that when I looked at the business plans last time, they were fairly appalling business plans that were driven up, and to take it off would send, as far as I'm concerned, the wrong signal that we're not looking at it anymore, and that they're not, anything can happen. I think these sort of contracts are in one of those things that could go horribly wrong, particularly for the council, and therefore I wouldn't want it to be dropped off anything that we should. I think personally we should be keeping an eye on it. That's I suppose my.
Yeah, the only point I was making is that, it will be basically hanging there for a number of years before we can actually bring it to the ONS board again, because of what the interim arrangements that have been made. But I do take your point entirely, and I understand the point that you made. We've got to make sure we keep our eye on this. But I think, and I am aware that people are working on this outside of, outside. But I'm quite happy to leave it there. It's only a piece of paper.
There will be conditions that whoever's got these contracts, there will be conditions that they have to fulfil, and if they're not fulfilling, then actually, we could take it off them if it was that bad, and therefore, to keep an eye on it, I would suggest is a good thing. Okay, we'll leave it on there. I'm Councillor Allison.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, that you're correct that we've now got those interim contracts in place, but it's not the message we got last time when we spoke about this last time. The portfolio holder told us he'd be bringing that review as soon as possible. He didn't say we were going to be waiting. He said he was trying to avoid waiting for the end of those interim contracts, and that he was planning on bringing it forward in the next few months, was what he said in the last ONS meeting.
Okay, I mean, what I would say is that, we can be proactive here. This board can make its own decisions on what it wants to look at. We don't have to wait necessarily, but we want to be proactive in this area. We can do that. So if people have got ideas about that, then please let us have them, and we can bring it back and talk about it. Councillor Howell.
Yes, I did ask a question at last council, Councillor Mohan Iyengar, and he got the wrong end of the stick when answering it, and I was going to send an email to all councillors, which I haven't yet done, but it was basically to point out that because of COVID and other issues related to well-being, the actual model of delivery of of leisure services to the public might change substantially. There might be much more local and much more outdoor provision than in the past. And I think that that is something, well, it doesn't seem to me that that's something that the council has internally got a grip on. And it's something that we might look at by forcing some kind of examination of what other authorities are doing, perhaps.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good idea. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I think following up from that, I think sort of giving it sort of 6 months for post Freedom Day, for when, you know, businesses are able to function in perhaps a more normal way, would be a great time for us to sort of try and bring it back, because by then the portfolio holder will have, you know, these people will have had their contracts. It's only fair to the organisations that they know sooner rather than later what our long-term plans are. And I think if we can have some positive impact and input early in that process, it's going to help the portfolio holder to understand what, you know, what the wider council thinks. So I don't think it's helpful to keep having it on there as a TBC. I wonder if perhaps we can sort of review where we are in perhaps November, with, okay, are we now ready to put this on our agenda for a few months hence, so that we actually have a timeline to work to? Otherwise, we're going to have this conversation every month, I think.
Yep, absolutely. I think we do need to put Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I do believe BH Live bring an annual review to the council. Perhaps it could be tied in when they're going to present their review. Perhaps we could do a review with the other leisure centres that they don't manage.
Yeah, I actually think we just had it for BDC. Yeah, not BDC, sorry. BH Live, I beg your pardon. I think we just had it. But that also reminds me that I'm a director of BH Live, and I'm very remiss in not putting my hand and declaring it as a local interest. I do apologise to the monitoring officer for my failing here. I hope you'll forgive me. Thank you.
Would I just be able to come back? I just wonder if, when we talk about this, whether it would be useful, in the same way as we've had the representatives from the bids to come in, to actually ask BH Live, everyone active, YMCA, and, well, I suppose head of leisure, to actually come in and tell us how they feel about it, as well as what we think. Let's hear from the horse's mouth how life is. Just, that feels like a very positive way of looking at it, and us asking them how they think the market looks going forward.
Yeah, I think that would be quite an interesting thing to do. How willing they would be to do that, I don't know. Because clearly there's a conflict of interest there between competing organisations. But
yeah. But they might be able to tell us what they think the future of leisure is in their space, and that's probably something that, if you dig around, you can find on their websites anyway. So it's not as if it would be commercially sensitive information.
Nevertheless, I think I think we'll leave it on there. We will decide when we're going to bring it back and how we'll address it. But I think, again, it's one of those things that we could sort of probe as a theme in terms of the question and answer, rather than wait for paper for us to ask the questions and see what responses we get back. Okay, thank you. Did I? Oh my goodness, I'm not doing very well today, am I? That was number 5. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Acquisition and compulsory purchase order strategy. Now, I think this was related to a potential paper on regeneration of pool at some point. I think Councillor Howell is nodding at me knowingly. So, I mean, I'm quite happy to leave it there if there is a potential for CPO, and also Councillor Broadhead is here. So maybe we get a view from him. Should we get a view from portfolio holder? Just give the background. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah, when I was portfolio holder for Regeneration, it was in the context of pool, but it was recognised that it would be useful potentially anywhere in BC. The we have a policy regarding compulsory purchase because at the very least it gives us leverage in terms of negotiations with site owners, and also obviously if we as a last resort we needed to use it, it would be available, more easily available. But it is up to Councillor Broadhead to update us, I think, on what the current administration believes.
Is there anything you can add to this, Councillor Broadhead?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we're in the process of setting up our urban regeneration company, and aside from just taking forward the initial 16 odd sites that we're talking about, they're also acting as a real kind of strategic lead on a lot of these areas. We've had a few initial workshops with them around this exact subject, as you know, as of right now. Because as Councillor Howell points out, it's good to have some kind of strategy around it. It's good to have it in the kind of toolbox, so to speak, as you're looking at place shaping. I'm in the throes of trying to pull together, and I was going to mention this earlier on, Chairman, in your section on the forward plan, a regeneration paper for probably maybe second of the cabinets in September, which you might want to think about on your forward plan, to pull together a lot of the different things that are happening in regeneration. Maybe even tie that together with the Winter Gardens paper as well. So rather than have the Winter Gardens as a separate one, kind of put it all under the banner. And I will take away whether we should have an update on that kind of CPO strategy, or it's deeper than that. It's more about just like an acquisition strategy related to regeneration, separate to the Council's other acquisition strategies. So it is forming part of that work. I think it's probably a good idea to bring it out in that, and I'll try and do that in that paper.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Well, of course, at item 7, we do actually have another paper, which is the maintenance of key destination locations across BCP and Poole Quay, which is a regeneration-related issue, I believe. And in fact, I think probably the CPO order issue formed part of that particular item. And I know that Councillor Howell has been working with Democratic Services on a scoping issue for overview and scrutiny on that. Unfortunately, the Democratic Services officer that's been dealing with that is not available at the moment, so I've been unable to find out where we are with actually preparing overview and scrutiny for that particular item. But is it possible that we can include that element of CPO into that particular item, for which does cover, you know, those key sort of regeneration areas across Bournemouth and Poole? Councillor Howell.
Thank you. I'd be loath to do that, actually, because it risks pushing it into the future, and how many other things might be tacked on. I think it would be better for Councillor Broadhead to develop his paper on regeneration. The proposal about Poole Quay does have some broader resonance in terms of other key heritage places, for example, Christchurch, Quay Central, Bournemouth, etc. So it might be worth thinking about how it's framed in the context of those key tourist areas. But I think there's some urgency to it. For example, if one goes down to Poole Quay at the moment, the bollards are all peeling paint. They look awful. One would think that that's just standard maintenance, but I've been informed by the street scene that there's no money for that. So that kind of maintenance is just not being done anywhere within BCP. So we've got a situation where, you know, the key tourist areas are degrading, in common actually with other places across the whole of BCP. But this is specifically saying, you know, our key, you know, tourist areas that we're presenting to the broader population. You know, how do we improve them and keep them to a standard?
Thank you for that clarification. I now think I understand better what item 7 is about. It's not specific, it's not regeneration exercise, it's about looking after what we've got already. So we won't include it with that, but in terms of how we deal with this CPO thing, I think we'll just leave it there. We'll wait to see what proposals Councillor Broadhead has got coming up for Cabinet, and it may be possible to encompass it at that point. We'll wait and see what Councillor Broadhead comes up with over the next few weeks. So I think we'll just move on from that. We've got the review of domestic abuse strategy coming up, which is something that we said that we wanted to do, which should stay on there. And then we've got scrutiny of the council's use of digital, which is something that Councillor Slade has suggested. I think it probably, let me ask you if you'd like to say a few words about that then, Councillor Slade, and see how members feel about that. And again, this was another item offered up for a theme type event.
It was offered up as a theme following on from the leaders' comments about the positive use of digital around adult social care, but it was sort of trying to encompass that broader thing of how we've used things like the Beach Check app, the AI, the 5G, and actually the transformation element. So I don't think it should sit within transformation because I think it's customer facing as well as internal. But I think if we can bring that as a themed piece and wrap up digital use across the various areas in the same way as Councillor Edwards suggested with transformation, there will be housing, social care, children's, etc. I think it would be great if we can pilot this new way of doing things with transformation, but we actually do something similar with digital and moving forward a couple of months later. So I don't think it's particularly urgent, but it would just be a theme for the future.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the customer-facing elements of that idea. Members, anybody got any views on that? Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, we've had sort of word that they're going to do these community hubs and things like using the libraries. Perhaps we could have an update on that included in this, because as you know, a lot of our population getting older, they don't have use of laptops, or they did have a laptop but don't know how to use it anymore because things change all the time and they get a bit bewildered. So I think we need to know what's out there for our people that don't have use of a computer. And this has been especially highlighted where residents are contacting us because there's no one at the town hall to answer the phone. So we're having to deal with all sorts of issues that you could actually do online, but they don't have that ability to do it. So I think, as I say, sorry, it was a bit of a long way to say about the community hubs, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, but you are. I mean, the community, the way that the community interfaces, interacts with the council is a very important issue, because it's how it's what forms most people's impression about the council. It's when they phone up and can't get hold of anybody, and and that's when they start getting on to councillors eventually. But it is an important issue, and part of the customer-facing issue, I think, is an important bit. But I'm sure it will take part or form part of transformation. Absolutely, I think it's a pretty key element of it. But it's a good point, well made, Councillor Edwards. What else is there? Domestic abuse, digital. So I think we'll if you're okay, we'll put the digital one on there. I think everybody's in violent agreement about that. Councillor Slade.
Sorry, I thought you'd finished there. I was going to say that there is something missing from our forward plan, and that is the agreement to have a working group on trees, which was going to sit when the local plan working group finished its work. So that should be sitting in page 31 under the second working group.
Yeah, there was actually two other things, and actually the trees thing was probably the last in the list, because in terms of the priority, because we actually had enforcement as well.
Yes.
What we were waiting for was to see that there would be a gap between the local working plan group work and whether there was going to be a delay in their activities where we could then squeeze in some activity to either do the enforcement issues or we deal with the trees. We can only have one working group working at any one time. So it's a question of what the priority is here. there is also, of course, the other issue about the potential for, still there is a potential for forming another committee, another overview scrutiny, and if it were to be, it could well be a place committee and that would take on environmental issues. And so that would probably be the best place for the, certainly for the trees to be accommodated.
I agree, but I think they need to be on
They
here
need
so
to
they
be on
don't
the
get
list.
forgotten.
No, you're right, they do need to be on the list, so we will put them on the list of things that we need to do. I think we need to probably just make sure that the enforcement issue is on there as well, please, Claire. Last but not least, I'm sorry, Councillor Brooke, you wish to declare an interest?
Fine, thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just when you had the discussions on the actions, there was reference to the affordable housing and money set aside. There was reference to BDC there, and I thought it pertinent that I made reference to the fact that I was a director on the BDC board from the council's standpoint.
Okay, thank you. So one last item, we've got the crime and disorder scrutiny annual report coming up. I think that's, we think it's August, but it may move. We're not quite sure yet. And that brings us to the end of what we've got on the floor plan at the moment. Claire, did you have something to say?
No, I was just going to confirm that it was.
Okay, so agenda item 6, public speaking, to receive any public questions, statements or petitions submitted in accordance with the Constitution. We have actually had, I don't believe we've had any statements, but we've had a question.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, we received one public question for this meeting from Mr. John Sprackling. That question has been received and responded to, and it has been published on the website, and everyone should have received a link to that.
Members content with that? Okay, thank you. So this brings us then to the agenda item 7, local plan working group. We've had a number of meetings now with the local plan working group, and very long, hard discussions we've had with it too. We are now at a position of making the local plan working group wishing to make some recommendations, I think was the output of that work. I'm going to invite the chair of the local plan working group, Councillor Mike Brooke, if he'd like to introduce or give an overview of what the committee has been doing and introduce the paper which has been published with this agenda. Thank you, Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. More than happy to. I'd like to start though, first of all, by thanking the support officers in this, the planning officers, Mark Axford and Laura Bright, who've worked tirelessly to ensure that all our recommendations and discussion points were added to or refuted prior to producing the document that I think you've got for item 8 on the agenda. I would also like to thank the local plan working group members themselves. We have worked very, very hard and had extra meetings to ensure that we have gone through the issues and options paper thoroughly and completely. And it has been no mean task. And I hope that the two recommendations that come out of our work are treated with the respect that they deserve.
Councillor Brooks, sorry, Councillor Brooks, can I just interject just a second? Given that your report and the next item on the agenda, which is the scrutiny of the Regeneration Cabinet report, is essentially dealing with the same thing. What I'm going to suggest is that before we actually go to any votes as a result of any recommendations that you made, that we actually consider the two agenda items together, because it is essentially the same subject. Because what I wouldn't want us to do is agree all the recommendations or disagree or whatever, and then get to the next agenda item only for it to be altered. So I think we need, if we come out with the recommendations, they need to be one and the same for both of these agenda items effectively, and it might save us a little bit of time as well. So if you're happy with that, Councillor Brooks, I think I can see the portfolio holder nodding away there. So members content that we deal with it in that way. It appears that we are. So, all right, sorry to interject there, Councillor Brooks.
That's quite all right, Chair, and I'm content as well. So if I can may carry on from where I got to, and I'm not be long. A lot of the changes that have been made have been single words, short statements, a few sentences, which have improved the text, clarified uncertainties, and at the end of the day, the document in agenda item 8 is an improved document from the original, and it also is much more aspirational, I think, in its outlook in terms of some of the council's own policies and directions of travel. So in terms of climate change, for instance, in terms of transportation, highways and communications networks. And while all those changes have been agreed completely by local working group, one of the recommendations being put before you is the result of us not being able to resolve the issue within the working party itself. You will see that recommendation 1 with regard to city regions was included in this report by a majority of 5-2 vote, as opposed to all the other changes which were unanimously agreed. So there is the recommendation with regard to dropping the word city out of the phrase city region. There are reasons for doing that. None of the 3 towns is actually classed as a city, and therefore it is actually false to refer to a city region. And there was considerable concern that by using the phrase city region, the characteristics of the 3 separate towns might possibly gradually get eroded away. And one of the things about BDC is that it has these 3 towns with their own unique characters. To remove the word city and just refer to it as a new region doesn't preclude the council from using the phrase city region with bids to the government for funding. I can't see that bids for funding necessarily should dictate phraseology within local plan documents. So that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation, which is right at the very end of the Working Party report, relates to an issue which we all agree, I think, is highly contentious, and that relates to the use of the standard formula for calculating our housing need based on the government requirement to use 2014 figures. The issue that has given us concern here relates very much to the ordering of the process. The issues and options document, it stands at the moment, starts with the 42 homes needed based upon that 2014 figures and standard formula. But the guidance given in the government's planning documents states that we actually need to do our own housing needs assessment first, and that should be the starting point. As it happens, that document has yet to be completed and has not been used as the starting point. The consequences, therefore, of not referring to our own local housing needs assessment in the document could lead to serious consequences for the council in terms of perhaps incursions on green belt and use of green belt land. It could potentially mean that we don't actually get a plan approved. I think it is therefore absolutely vital that this piece of work, which is currently underway and due to have the first draft available by the end of July, is completed, and that the local working party meets again to discuss that with our planning support officers, and so that we can then work currently section 4.2 into a fully inclusive document in terms of all the options that are available, because currently that particular option based on our housing needs assessment is not included within the options. I will leave it there for your discussions, other than to point out that that recommendation is slightly different and not particularly that is slightly different from the one in the cabinet papers, and to my reckoning the cabinet paper recommendation B is not acceptable, because it would lead potentially to the bypassing of that bit of work by the working party. I'm sure Councillor Broadhead would interject and say, or potentially interject and say, that he would guarantee that our work would be included, but without it being in the recommendation to Cabinet from the ONS board, that is the risk that that work would be bypassed, and that would be highly unsatisfactory for the council, for the residents, and for the future of our local plan. I'll end it there, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. There are two other members of the local plan working group that requested to speak today. I think Councillor Margaret Phipps is one of them. I don't know if she's online at the moment.
Yes, I am, Chairman.
Okay, before I come to you, Councillor Phipps, I've received a statement from Councillor Felicity Rice, and she's asked me to read out this following statement. I am a member of the local plan working group. I would like to highlight that I do not think this consultation puts the factual severity of the climate and ecological crisis into perspective for those that will be completing the consultation, and is therefore, in my opinion, misleading. The working group did not receive direct professional advice from any sustainability experts during our meetings. I would like to propose that BCP Council needs to create a new officer position that can oversee the climate and ecological complexities of creating a local plan to ensure that it legally fits within the UK climate emergency legislation. So that's the view put forward, and I'll come back to that view. I think is Mark Axford on the call?
I am, Councillor, yes.
You are, okay. I was just checking that you make sure you're there, because I want to come back to that point that she raises about the sustainability issue, because I thought there was another report being produced to cover those aspects of it, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Councillor Phipps, can I ask you to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, well, I have to say that Councillor Brooke has basically put the case for the working party's recommendations very succinctly, so I won't say probably as much as I was going to. I absolutely want to confirm what he said and reinforce all the statements he's made about our two recommendations. I have to say I did say quite a lot at the working party group meetings. For those of you that were there, I'm probably the reason we had some more meetings than we were originally planned to have. But I think it is very, very important for everybody in the whole of BC to get this right, and we get our consultation on this issues and options draft local plan right. So the first item being the removal of the word city, I'm not going to say any more on that. I think Councillor Brooks explained it very, very well, and I absolutely agree with him. There's absolutely no need for that word to be there, and in my opinion, most of our residents wouldn't want it there. But the main issue that I certainly spoke on at the working group was the issue of the housing and the approach we had taken in this issues and options document at the moment as it stands to our housing numbers, and basically gone directly down the line of going with the 2014 standard method figures and then basically fitting the land availability to suit. That's the way the consultation is coming across. We were told many times that that number, as from the standard method, was the minimum number of houses that we should have, but only if you're using the standard method. And the opportunity does arise for exceptional circumstances, if you have them, to use an alternative method. And that is what we have not explored. And the first step, according to the planning policy guidance, is the housing needs assessment. Now, it is happening, it is being done, but we absolutely need to wait for that. And there could be vital information within it that could feed into this local plan consultation issues and options. I'm absolutely certain of that, but we need to have that opportunity to look at it as a working group. We've got this far, we've done so much work. Everybody within the group has spent an awful lot of time on the whole issues and options document. And I believe we should, and I ask you to give us the time to finish the job, have a look at the housing needs assessment and come back basically to the head of planning and the portfolio holder before this goes out to consultation with the views of the working group and any other recommendation we might like to put based on what comes out of the housing needs assessment. And that is what is set out in our recommendation at paragraph 3.3 on that local working plan paper. I agree with Councillor Brooke that item B of the Cabinet paper needs to be changed to reflect the fact that we would like to have another meeting of the working group, have a look at this, and then basically come back again. I think there's no need for me to say any more. I think you've got the gist of it all. And thank you very much for letting me speak, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Members, before I come to members, I think it might be worth getting a response from Councillor Broadhead initially, because it may be that he's in violent agreement with some aspects of this, in which case we can then focus our discussion on those areas that maybe he's not so keen on, if that is indeed the case. So Councillor Broadhead, would you like to respond to what Councillor Brooks has said and the other members of the local working group have said?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I'll respond to these bits rather than giving an overview of the rest of the paper, because I think it's important that we look at the rest of the paper as well at some point. I love your term, you've used it before, violent agreement, and yes, I think in this case for that second recommendation, I am in violent agreement. I just want to start by just echoing Councillor Brooks's thanks at the very beginning to the work that the local plan working group has been undertaking. Not only has it been, really quite focused, very deep, there's been a big time commitment, but by and large all members have left personalities and politics at the door to get on to what this is, which is the ultimate placemaking document for the next kind of 15 odd years. And equally, very few of the members have been quick to pop up and say, that was my idea, that was my idea. It has been very, very good in terms of how we've worked together. I think the recommendation to reflect the housing needs assessment is a really helpful one. As I'd said in the full council only recently, there's a bit of work being done at the moment around looking at the government's 2014 method. That's what we have to be using, and to tease it apart about whether there's flexibility within there. There's a number of different ways that we're pushing back against some of these numbers. First of all, as I mentioned at that motion, and as is recognised within this, some of the challenging some of the demographic assumptions that are within that, and that will, I'm sure, reflect in an updated figure, which is better to be consulting on. There's many other discussions as well, both politically with the Secretary of State. Now that we've got our Urban Regeneration Company on board as well, they'll be doing some work as we enter the next stages of the local plan, which is the kind of formative stages around actually, we are a special circumstance here. Could we be a pilot area for a slightly different way of doing things? So no stone is going unturned in terms of how we battle this. But equally, in order to have a solid evidence base, we have to consult on what we've got in front of us. I'm absolutely happy to accept that recommendation. The point that Councillor Brooks and Councillor Phipps have made about the change that would be needed to recommendation B of the Cabinet report is absolutely right. I will commit to that in advance. The reason we couldn't do that before this Overview and Scrutiny Board is that we can't make change. This is a published document already. So as we go forward to take this to Cabinet, I will be amending recommendation B to ensure that within there, quite sure the wording that we'll agree to, but it will be the spirit of the recommendation that we'll have a further meeting of the working group so that we can look at those initial findings of the housing needs assessment. Final point on this particular one. I don't think it was ever really the intention of the local plan team to ignore that. There was always a question mark over when that housing needs assessment was going to go in. We know that we're already pushing against the time to be able to do this consultation. So now that we know definitively when that initial work is in, I think we can weave it in and weave it in very helpfully. The only thing I would say as well, and this is more about the paper generally, but a point to make now, this consultation is a very high level consultation about the issues and opportunities at a high level that we will need to consider as we enter the next stage of the local plan process, which is where we come up with the strategies. So Dorset have taken a very different approach. They have done a lot of work and really come up with their draft local plan and then taken that to consultation. So they've chosen what they think is palatable or what they think is not palatable and then consulted on those bits. We've taken a very different approach. We've said, here are all the sites that have been promoted to us. Here are all of the high-level issues and some of the high-level answers that we might have to look at to get people's opinions before we do that next piece of work. So I think this incorporation of the housing needs assessment will be very, very positive and helpful within that, but it was never thought that it was entirely critical because at this stage we are only talking about those high-level issues which will inform what we do next as we go into the process. The other recommendation is perhaps slightly more controversial. I'd hopefully look for the Vice Chair's support on this one because we have been very open that we are known by government as a city region. I don't think for one second that changes the flavour of anybody's particular street, but it is a sense of ambition about the area that we are. It is how we are viewed by government. I mentioned that the Vice Chair, because in her own LinkedIn profile, she talks about our city region and has used that phrase before. So it has got some cross-party support and is a part of our local plan. But I appreciate people will have, our big plan. But I appreciate people have very different views on that, and I will take that away for further consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dedman. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify what the portfolio holder was saying. Do I understand that he's actually agreeing that we will have the housing figures before, as the chair of the working party was saying? I've sort of got a bit muddled up with him saying yes, he totally agrees with everything. So could you clarify what he's actually agreeing with? Is he agreeing with Councillor Brooke and saying yes, go ahead with all of that?
Well, it's my understanding that, yes, he's basically saying we have got to look at the alternative position and present both in the consultation document. Am I right, Councillor Broadhead? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I'm not hearing you, Councillor Broadhead.
Sorry. Yes, you're absolutely right, and it's fortuitous that we will have that up-to-date data to be able to incorporate it before the consultation. We weren't sure we were going to be able to do that before, so yes, fully agree with the recommendation. We will commit to a further meeting with the working plan, the local plan working group, prior to that consultation going out, and then we will be able to make amendments to the document and therefore the consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I know that the portfolio holder was keen to talk about the wider document. Would you like me to keep my questions and comments specifically to this bit at the moment to come back?
I think what we'll do now is we'll just focus on the local working group paper and make sure that we're, as the Overview and Scrutiny Board, are content with that. And it looks as if we've got some agreement on that at the moment, unless anybody wants to dissent from that. But we'll open it up for debate. And having addressed that, we will then move to the main paper, of which, you know, we've already had a sort of an agreement that the recommendation B will be changed in line with what's been recommended in the local working group paper, which is a very key point. Although I suspect that there'll be a bit more debate about the city region issue. So I think probably best we address that in a minute.
So because I've got some questions relating to the wider local plan document that's under item 8, but I'm happy to just raise my questions about the two issues, the city region and the housing numbers at this point, if that's easier for you.
Yeah, I'm quite happy for you to raise those now. Yeah. And
okay. I mean, I think as I was quoted about the city region, we did start using the city region as an alternative to the city by the sea, which we were violently in disagreement with, as a sort of something we were prepared to accept. So yes, I have used that phrase in the past, but I do accept that even city region is something that a lot of people find uncomfortable. So I'm sitting on the fence on that one quite sharply. In terms of the housing numbers, I don't want to labour the point, but I think it comes back to something around the performance management of the officers. Because I had an email on the 8th of June 2020 in which I was told that a local housing needs assessment was being jointly commissioned with Dorset Council. That was 13 months ago. So the idea that such an item was not ready is just fills me with horror as to why was it not ready. I then had an email on the 10th of June 2021 which stated that the company, and I won't name them because I'm assuming it's commercially sensitive, had produced a draft and it was currently subject to checking. That was 5 weeks ago. So the information we're getting now about we're expecting a draft document and it should be ready by August, it doesn't match with the information I was given in June, and it's also 13 months after I was told this was being done. So I do find it hard to believe that it's taken us so long to commission this and get it out. So where's the performance management on this contract that's been done? And the second question I have is relating to that is, if this document shows that our actual local housing need is, say, 20,000, and the whole document has been written based on 42,500, is there now time to rewrite everything, or are we just, is it going to be a footnote? Because I think people will feel that if we accept that you're going to hold back until the working party's got that information, if it's going to end up as a footnote, people are going to feel a little bit uncomfortable about that. I just need to understand what you're going to do with that information if it turns out that it's wildly different from the figure. Thank you.
thank you, Councillor Slade. Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's probably better that officers may be able to answer the first question about why this has taken so long. I'm not the expert on the intricacies of these things, but I know it was a joint paper, as you referenced, with Dorset. It is a very big piece of work. I know that the officer team then get the initial kind of drafts through, and invariably there's extra information that maybe wasn't considered that they will want to do about that. I can absolutely commit that it's not a giant conspiracy. So, I mean, these things take time, and it hasn't been delayed by any stretch. These are just, it's a really important document that will flavour, what goes on in the future. So perhaps officers may be able to answer that one first.
Indeed.
Mr. Axford.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Yes, there was some delay in actually procuring the housing needs study. We jointly procured it with Dorset County Council. I'm sat here racking my brains trying to think of the exact date we did procure it, but they've been meeting with their schedule as set out in our procurement briefs. So that's the first thing I'll say. But things have moved on quite readily in terms of a challenge from the made to the ONS, whereby there's been a challenge to the two assumptions led behind the 2014 household projections. Now that's all been quite new information for ourselves, and we have gone back accordingly to the consultants to ask for more work to be done. So what they had was a completed document looking at the standard method figure. But what I would say is the housing needs study is more than just determining a housing need number. It's very much about trying to understand what that number looks like then in terms of types and tenure of dwellings. So it's quite a major piece of work, but to my mind, it is on schedule, and we're going back purely because of this additional information we now have and further evidence on the household projections. Thank you.
Councillor Slade, you okay with that?
Yeah, I just think we need to be keeping an eye on how long these, 13 months, even if it is a big piece of work, still sounds like an awful long time.
Okay, Councillor Broadhead, do you want to come back on the second point?
Yes, on the second point, I think it's just worth reiterating what this document is and what this document isn't. As I referenced earlier on, it's kind of two ways you can do a consultation. You can either say, here's what our view of the world is, what do you think? Or you can throw out the various things that you'll have to consider. And, some of the headings within this document are around regenerating our town centres, around our economy, our natural environment, our built environment, health and well-being, climate change, and to get people's broad views on certain directions of travel within there, so that then that can inform what the next piece of work does, which is the putting together the strategy. Now, even if we ended up miraculously in the next 5 months becoming one of the government's pilots for an area that does something special and gets half the housing numbers or something, we are still going to want to get the public's opinion on a number of those areas. And, a lot of the direction of travel are going to be broadly similar. So I would be much more concerned if I thought that the housing needs assessment was going to give us an absolute silver bullet on an entirely different number, and this consultation document was based around a definitive plan that we were presenting to the public for how to meet a number which was entirely different. That's not what this document is. This document is saying, here, we've got an opportunity now for the future of our area for some time in terms of built environment. Here are the likely choices that we're going to have to make. Tell us your views on them. So I absolutely think it's compatible with any revisions that come through of that document without having to make enormous changes to the consultation document, because it is very deliberately high level, because we don't know best and we want the public's view on what they think about some of these important issues to inform that next step.
Thank you, Councillor Broad. Just for absolute clarity then, because it is my understanding that both sets of data will be presented, and the options or the impact of both of those options being fully described within the paper that will eventually go out to consultation. In other words, this is not just a footnote as described by Councillor Slade. This will include the complete rationale and the impact of either of those options in terms of the housing targets that we'll eventually come up with. Can you just confirm that that understanding is correct?
Broadly speaking, I do believe that that's the intention that we're looking at the moment. That's certainly the discussions that I've had with the officer team. Obviously, I'll be working with the local plan working group prior to that consultation document be put out there in the public. So I can't preempt what the conversations may well be about a slightly different way. That's the thinking at the moment. And just one more thing, if I may, which I didn't mention earlier on. The other reason for doing this document, and therefore the other reason for presenting that in the way that you described, Chairman, is that when we come to the inspection period for the local plan, we need evidence. We need evidence if we want to have exceptional circumstance. We need evidence if we have a certain direction we're going in around what the public thinks. So the more that we can get the public engagement to serve as a crucial extra piece of that evidence, I think the more ammunition it will give us for the choices that we've got to make in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions of my own, and it does actually relate to the issues that Councillor Rice raised in her question that I received just before the meeting. But it's my understanding that a sustainability appraisal, and I think this is actually mentioned in the main report, that the sustainability appraisal report has been prepared and it will accompany the consultation document. Now, my question is, where is it, and will it go out to consultation without having been reviewed? Maybe that's a question for the officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The document is presently in a form of a scoping study. So what we've done as officers is prepare a sustainability appraisal, and this is linked to Councillor Rice's query. But what I would say about sustainability appraisal, it's social, economic and environmental considerations in that document. So it's much broader than just environmental stroke climate change issues we'll be assessing in that document. And currently it sets out a whole range of objectives, if you like, which the more detailed policies, when they begin to emerge in the submission draft, will be tested against. Very much an iterative type process. Punch them in, see how they begin to perform as we begin to draft the detailed wording of those policies. At the moment, we're still quite broad brush, aren't we, with high level options, if you like. So it's a key part of the process. It's a statutory part of the process we have to carry out. We've done so with all our previous local plans. One of the first questions the inspector will ask is, have you done a sustainability appraisal? And the answer will have to be yes, otherwise we don't get to examination. So it's the idea being we haven't brought it to the group as such, the working group, but we anticipate it sat as a background document to the actual consultation on the issues and options draft itself. People are very welcome to make comments on that document as well as on the issues and options draft, but the main consultation is on the draft of the plan itself rather than sustainability appraisal. I'll leave it there. Thank you. If that's useful.
Thank you. I'm not sure that it is because if there is an appraisal document that will go out with a consultation, then why can't the local working group look at it before it goes out? It's clearly been enough to get one of the members asking the question about sustainability and the issues around the local plan. Surely if the plan is going to go out, it could be made available for us to have a look at. Portfolio holder.
Thank you, Chairman. It is already a publicly accessible document, and I think it was consulted on earlier on this year, that scoping report. If I'm referring to the correct one, Mr. Axford may correct me on that, but this is the sustainability appraisal scoping document that was consulted on earlier on this year.
If I may, Chairman, it was consulted on with statutory bodies. As part of the legislative process, we have to consult with the Environment Agency, Natural England and English Heritage. So we consulted with them at a particular stage in coming up with the scoping report. So basically, it's just a scoping report as we speak. And one of the critical things is in there, like I said, it's setting out the objectives and how the plan policies will be tested against sustainability objectives. Now, it's attached to the Cabinet report papers as a public document. Whether it, I hear what you're saying about scrutiny, but it hasn't got the same status actually as the actual plan itself, which we obviously have been scrutinising through the ONS working group. But it is already public and it will be sat there with the consultation document as a background paper.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Axford. Let me make a suggestion then, shall I? If it's public accessible, the paper's been public, then what I suggest is that the local plan working group look at the document. And you, as the portfolio has already agreed, the consultation document won't go out unless it's discussed in its final form with the working group. So there will be an opportunity to for that paper to be looked at and commented on if necessary. So I think that should meet that particular requirement. Councillor Slade.
I just wondered whether you needed an additional item on the, if we're changing the recommendation on the item 8 around accepting the recommendation that the working party meets before, does it need a separate recommendation that includes the sustainability document having been reviewed by the working group as well? Because if it does, I'm happy to propose it.
I'm not, given that it's been a public document for some, I'm not sure necessarily it needs a formal review of the document by the group. I think, but given that the consultation document can't go out unless it's actually been agreed by the working group, I think it's up to members to look at it, and then if they do have any issues with it, they can then raise it with the working group before they agree to allow the consultation document out. And I think that probably is a reasonable way forward. You happy with that, Councillor Broadhead?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Chair. I think the chairman of the local plan working group can decide what that local plan working group looks at, and if that group decide that they want to look at this document, then absolutely fine. Just to draw a line under exactly what this is and what this isn't, a little bit like the rest of the document. This is a scoping document saying here are the parameters that we'll need to judge the future work that we do in sustainability as part of the local plan process. And clearly there's a tremendous amount of extra work that will have to be done. In fact, Kate Ryan and I've been talking to Nick Perrins and Colin, who's the director we've got of transformation in planning, about whether we would need to get some external support rather than necessarily just another officer, as Councillor Rice has alluded to, precisely because of recognition that there's further work to do in this area.
Oh, I haven't turned my microphone on. Sorry about that. What I was saying is that I'm not sure that Councillor Rice's statement regarding the legality or fitting in the legal aspects with the UK climate emergency legislation, and whether that generates or is required legally to have a BCP council officer position for that. I don't know. I don't think it's an issue for this particular document or for this consultation paper, but it certainly, I'd be interested to hear what officers have got to say about whether there is a need to create a new officer position to look at the ecological complexities of creating a local plan, or that's already accommodated within the organisation that we have. Is there any way you could answer that, Mr. Axford?
I'll give it a go, Chairman. I know we have a team which looks at climate change and how the council will be reacting to it over the next coming years. Roxanne King springs to mind in that team. So that's very much their speciality, and we have been liaising with them. Now, maybe we go as far as they want to go, maybe we don't go as far as they want to go, but there is already that embedded speciality within the council, whether that's something members might want to consider building up on, or is that something already in place which negates the reason to have other officers in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Axford. I mean, given that the working group will be sitting again, what I would suggest is this is something they can discuss when they next sit. So I think that would give Councillor Rice an opportunity to raise the issue again at that particular forum. So I think what we need to do now is to move on to the agenda item 8. Unless any members have got anything else that they'd like to add to agenda item. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, it is 7. Has anybody got anything else that they'd like to say? Councillor Evans. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just add that the scoping report link is on page 70 of our papers.
You mean the scoping report for the local plan working group? Okay, thank you. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I wholeheartedly agree that the city should be taken out of the wording. I appreciate what Councillor Broadhead and Councillor Slade have said about the need for central government want to use it, but just because central government wants to use it doesn't mean that we have to use it. And I do think that issue of us being a city by the sea is an anathema to a lot of residents, and therefore, you know, if we're to be seen to be on their side, which I think we all should be, then we should try and avoid that expression, because there's a lot of there's a lot of familiarity about the fact that we are three towns, and there's a lot of pride in those 3 towns, which we should take comfort in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cox. I think I would agree with you. And indeed, city by the sea was an expression that was actually disregarded quite some time ago because there was significant opposition to it. That then morphed in a way to city region, and the reason for that was because apparently government do recognise the conurbation as a city region, although I'm not sure how that's formally promulgated in any way. I'm not sure that maybe the portfolio holder can tell us whether the government has a list of areas which are considered to be a city region without necessarily having a city within that particular area. But of course, you know, one of the things that LGR did was, or we said that we would make sure is that each element of the conurbation would retain its individuality. And it's very important we do that in a number of different ways, and that includes the language that we use when we're describing it. And I think that, you know, the city region is an expression which I think is one step towards actually diverting from that premise that we will always be 3 distinctly different areas with their own heritages and cultures and all the rest of it that go along with it. But equally, I do understand the point that Councillor Broadhead makes, in that, you know, the government clearly wanted us to go down the LGR route, and they wanted to do it for very good reasons, and part of that was grouping us together in economic terms and economic mechanisms that the government exercise, obviously. But I think it is an anathema to a number of residents. I don't think it's ever been put forward in some kind of consultation. I think it's just something, if you say it often enough, everybody starts believing it, and that's where we are at the moment. So it'd be interesting to see what Councillor Broadhead's got about it. But before we do that, let's ask Councillor Debburn what she's got to say.
Thank you, Chairman. I was agreeing with you so much there until you said the government had very good reasons for LGR, and then I thought, no, I can't. No, but certainly with the city region, I seem to remember quite a while ago, and I'm sure a lot of people around the table will remember that at one point we were going to be Wessex City. And so it's been discussed round and round, and I think that we have to accept that certainly in my area of the region, it isn't looked on with favour. So I think it's far better not to keep labouring the point that region. We have to stick to our guns and just be a region of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. So thanks, Chairman.
Councillor Broadhead, would the government be upset if we stop using that terminology within our own consultation papers?
Chairman, you know the government as well as I do, they're upset no matter what you do, but you know, clearly play the game a little bit when you're talking about funding in particular, which, let's be honest, is important to services for our local council taxpayers, and that's front and foremost. I see the Chief Executive has his hand up, so he may be able to tell us a little bit more about the methodology that the government use and the importance of that. You know, I think there is a danger of us all presupposing what absolutely everybody in the area thinks about every single issue that comes up. The fact of the matter is that I don't think it's a binary choice. You know, I've lived in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole at various points of my life. They have their own individuality, but we are the 10th largest urban authority in the country because we are an urban area. City is a very loaded term. I think the city region just says an urban area, and I think that's the basis for why government uses it. However, you know, I will put my hands up. Politically, we have put it front and centre of our big plan, because as we hope to drive that economic prosperity forward, I think it is important that we demonstrate the actual scale that we are operating on, But by no means do I think that that means that it has to undermine the individuality of our more rural areas or our more, semi-urban areas. It's not a binary choice, but, we are a travel to work area of 500,000 people now. If a spade's a spade, you've got to call a spade in my view, but the Chief Exec may have some more detailed information about how the government operates.
Yeah, thank you very much. Chief Exec, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just check you can hear me okay? Is this microphone working? Yep,
fine,
thanks. I had to swap over microphones. Just simply that the government tries to use shorthand as we do, and alternative shorthands for this sort of size of place are words like conurbation, which are pretty ugly. If you look at the population we've got, which is 400,000 or thereabouts within BCP, 450 plus thousand in the immediate environs as well, and then compare that with the Dorset population, which for the whole of Dorset Council now is about 380,000 in an area well over 20 times as big. That density of population, we try to recognise with the terms that we use. The members of the Unity Alliance leadership will know that we struggle to get the right word, and city region was probably the most acceptable of the sort of terms we've got, but government uses the shorthand, so we're eligible for Transforming Cities Fund, and yet they know that we're not a city. So they've used examples like that where it is just a shorthand. We're trying to find the best sort of shorthand, but we all recognise that this is made up of 3 major towns, but actually it's made up, 15 high streets, a whole range of communities. Nobody, I think, has ever said this is a homogenous area that forms one city, and I think we need to be really, really clear about that. But the language is all about finding convenient shorthand that will work both for residents, for the communities, for the council, and for government as well. And I think that's what we're trying to do in all of these documents.
Okay, thank you, Chief Exec. Councillor Howell.
Yes, this might be an appropriate time for Councillor Broadhead to clarify something. He was quoted recently, I think in the Echo, but it may be some other online media, saying that he would look favourably on the recent proposal by some third party that Bournemouth should make a bid to be a city again. I don't know if you could just clarify whether that statement he made was in his personal capacity or as a portfolio holder. Thanks.
Councillor Broadhead.
Absolutely happy to, because it is linked to this, isn't it? As we all know, well, as we may have heard, that there is an opportunity this year as part of the Monarchs Think Jubilee celebrations. They will be awarding a number of areas with city status. Now, that could be a town or it could be a council area. And I was asked for my views on whether I thought that would be a good idea or not. I think, if I recall, I was being very careful at the time. My view was very, very strongly that you kind of got to hear what people and local businesses think. I think we all have different views, as we've heard today. The actual name city rather than city region, again, doesn't really make a difference, in terms of hard and fast to a number of to anybody's life. But actually could, you look at Coventry this year that has just been the City of Culture, and I was there for a conference a couple of weeks ago, has seen a £600 million boost of investment by having that City of Culture status, which is only applicable to cities. My view is that I'd like to hear what people think, and I was talking to the leader this morning and a number of others about maybe getting some soundings from the public on whether they think it's something we should or shouldn't do. Not wedded to it either way, because as we all know, it's very emotive, but you can't ignore the level of investment things like that attract. So worth listening to people is always my view.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to move on to the next, agenda item 8 now, which is the main report. Do you want to start off, Councillor Slade? You're looking at me, or shall we? Okay, Councillor Broadhead. Did you want to say anything? As you said we needed to look at this report. Do you want to say anything about it before we offer it out for discussion?
Just a very quick underlining of the point about, as I said earlier on, we must take into account what we're trying to do here and what we're not trying to do. This is not our version of what we think the local plan is. It's an honest assessment of some of the real challenges, issues and opportunities that we'll have to face. and we're asking what the public think, because you take an example of the green belt. Gosh, an ever so emotive issue, isn't it? There is a very good chance that in order to protect as much of the green belt as possible, we intensify our urban areas. That perhaps helps with regeneration, helps with younger people perhaps that want to live in those areas. That protects the green belt. I think a lot of us would agree that that's the best direction of travel, but equally other people may well think, no, actually the best way to get affordable family homes that we need is not to stick loads of flats in our town centres, but actually to delicately release some green belt for more affordable family homes. Now, I don't think that that's the answer that will come out, but you only know when you actually ask people. So, paragraph 10 in the report does talk about the fact that there is a lot more evidence that will be informing the actual strategy preparation which comes next. We've got a retail and leisure study, we've got a housing needs studies we've talked about, we've got the work ongoing with gypsy and travellers accommodation need assessment, and a really important bit of work with our hotel and visitor accommodation strategy, which will be helping to inform the next steps. But this document is, a very frank way of saying, here's all the sites that have been promoted, here are all the options. Now tell us what you think. I think it's really important that we remember that, because as soon as we start trying to put our own opinions too much onto this type of thing, it becomes less of a what do you think and more of a what do you think to what I think.
Thank you, Councillor Rawhead. Members, Councillor Dedman?
I thought we had some recommendations on this one before we moved on, or have we not moved on?
Yeah, we've moved on, but we do have recommendations. But remember, what I said was we would take them both at the end in order that we can rationalise the two together. Thank you. Did you want to say anything? No?
No, thank you.
Okay, so anybody want to talk to this paper? Yep, Councillor Slade.
Apologies, I thought I'd wait till nobody else was showing. I have a number of questions, so you might want to write them down, Councillor Broadhead. The first thing in the paper, it talks about us not Christchurch and Bournemouth not having. Currently, the legacy areas cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of land. This is paragraph 7 on page 65. I'm just wondering what the 5-year land supply actually is, because I thought maybe I've missed it, but I would have thought that would be in the paper, just so that we've got that for information. The next item I'm a bit worried about is, so let's take the next one is about paragraph 12, which talks about how we're going to consult. I don't think we should underestimate the power of roadshows. They're so incredibly important for people who perhaps find this document incredibly wordy, for them to see a series of boards in their own environment and be able to just tell people how they feel and have it written down by someone. So I'd be really disappointed if we avoided those. I know it says we're hoping to, but I think we should go out of our way to make sure they happen outdoors if necessary. And the other issues I've got are around the paper itself. It refers on that beautiful infographic that you've got at the beginning to 1 in 20 deaths in our area is due to air pollution. There are 9 references to the word air pollution in the paper, but 5 of them refer to the quality of the air for the heathlands. So there's only 4 references in the whole paper to air quality, and I think, although I understand that that's referenced in one little section about transport, if it's important enough to go on that infographic, I would have liked to have seen more about how we're going to make the place safer, because that's quite a staggering figure, and I was quite disturbed when I saw that was there, and I wondered why that had been picked out if we weren't then going to make quite a big thing of it later on. The next thing relates to energy. So page 124 talks about whether we should or we shouldn't allocate land for energy generation. What it doesn't do is it doesn't reference to whether we should ask to work with our neighbours about whether they can generate energy for us. It only talks about allocating land within our own boundaries. So it doesn't give people the opportunity to ask, for example, whether we might want to look at offshore wind again, or whether we might want to ask Dorset not to take an element of our homes, but to help us with energy generation outside of our boundaries. And that feels like a missed opportunity. On the same page, there's some very unclear language on figure 21 that I think will make people a bit confused. It would be great if that was simplified. So under B clean, it says supply energy efficiently energy. I just wonder if we could say supply energy efficient power, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. And then further down that page, it talks about we would need to commission further evidence in the form of a renewable energy strategy to advise, etc., etc. But it doesn't say whether we intend to commission a renewable energy strategy. So I'm wondering whether we intend to, or whether we're just sticking it there and not going to do it. And then just going back to that great infographic, why, if we're now generating 126 megawatts, have we put 112 megawatts, but it's increased to 126 when that's historic? Why not just put 126 megawatts? Sorry, I know that's quite a lot of stuff, but you can always rely on me to read the paper.
I think Councillor Slade probably picked up on a few points that maybe the working group might have picked up on.
Oh.
I think we'll get you on the working group next time. Okay, you're started for 10, Councillor Broadhead. There are 7 questions there, actually. No doubt you would like to probably bring in Mr. Axford.
I think I will. I'll try my best, and then Mr. Axford can mop up anything that I've missed out. And look, there's a few kind of typo points in there, particularly around the solar point and the energy efficiency bit that I'm sure we can look at. And you know, as we've referenced earlier on, we've got time. This not going out until later on in the summer. We'll have further working group meetings on it, so perhaps something that we pick up on as part of the local plan working group as well. Some of the other points, and I completely understand your points, particularly around the energy and the air quality. And there's always a quandary with these documents in that how far does it become your gospel on everything you find important, and how much do you define it to the parameters of what you're trying to do here? So, for instance, you look at the air quality. You know, clearly, it's a really important issue, and it's something that we need to get to grapple with on a much more holistic level. That the reason the heatland implications are referenced is because that is one of those that has direct planning implications, particularly as we try and build new homes and prepare the local plan. So I think what we've tried to do within this is obviously broadly talk about the areas that are going to be important in the future, the direction of travel, what is important to all of us, but try and bring the examples to actually what is going to be referenced, directly responsible within the local plan. And we all know that we do things in a much deeper way in a number of these areas. But when you're talking about the plan for homes and premises being built, the built environment, I think obviously there are some direct links to things like air quality when you're talking about heat mitigation and energy production, where you may well have to release some of the land in your own area. You might not have to, and of course we're doing a lot of work with Dorset over this, not least through a forthcoming paper that's coming through the next LEP board meeting this week or next week, where it talks about getting ahead of some of this stuff into the future. So, but we can't get everything in there. I think that's the point I would make. With regard to the consultation, I think it's a really good point. We've yet to fully define what the actual consultation will be looking like. One of the benefits of Dorset going first on this, if you like, is that they've done a very, very exhaustive consultation to such degree that it's now taking them even longer to wade through the consultation responses than they thought, because they got even more feedback than they thought they did. And theirs was a digital only consultation. Now, clearly, we're not going to go that far, and there's going to be kind of outreach that we will need to do, and we can do, because they were doing it under the umbrella of the pandemic at the time. But equally, I think there's an awful lot of good practice we can learn for them. Funny enough, I've got a meeting with the comms team and the consultation team only in the next week about some of the lessons that we've been learning for them, so that we can make sure that we can take all the good things that they've done and all the best practices of the past to go into the future. I'll let Mark Axford answer the question on the 5-year housing land supply. I'm pretty sure that's related to the current out-of-date plans that we've got, hence the need for really getting on with this, but Mark may have more detailed answers on that point.
Before you come in, Mark, I mean, these points are all noted and listed, and they can all be looked at a bit before the consultation goes out by the working group. We are getting to the point where we're going to have to bring this discussion to a close, because we've got another agenda item that's going to be a bit lengthy. So I'll let Mark answer those elements of it that you're able to, Mark, and then we've got Councillor Cox who wants to speak, and Councillor Howell wants to put his hand up. Okay. So also, I know that Councillor Borthwick has put his hand up several times, and I'm going to let him come in. Oh, you're okay, are you? All right. So once Councillor Howell has had his, then I'm going to draw this debate to a close. Oh, and we've got, and okay, but of course we do have the recommendation to deal with as well. And by the time we get to that, you can see our time is going to leave us a bit short. So, Mr. Axford.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, the 5-year land supply figure, we can update members on that. I have to do some work with another team there to get to that figure. Just one thing I would say, we're currently surveying the completions for 2021. There's always a slight delay in that, but we will be able to provide you with the latest 5-year supply figure, if that will be useful. Will that be useful, Chairman, for the next working group? So we can wrap it up at that stage, hopefully.
I don't see why not.
Thank you. In terms of the figure at 2.1, again, I think you're right, Councillor Stade. I think that must be a slight typo within there. I'll check to make sure we get that correct. We were talking about Para 12 and consulting and use of road shows and the like. Clearly, COVID's had an impact, hasn't it, in terms of being able to use road shows. But as Councillor Broadhead said, yes, we are engaged with our comms team and the consultation team, coming up with a strategy for how we can engage with the public. Clearly, we want to do a lot more online for obvious reasons. But if it's appropriate for road shows, then no doubt we will be doing some road shows as well as webinars and hopefully more digital type interactive sort of media to ask questions. For example, it might be on greenbelt or housing land supply, for example. And we know that Dorset Council did something along those lines, which was quite useful. Otherwise, I take Councillor Say's point about the references to air quality, and a lot of references in there on heathland air quality, and that's primarily because we've recently had an issue with that, haven't we, which we know we need to address under the habitats regulation. But equally, air quality is obviously a key consideration for the human population, as well as for the animals and reptiles on the heathland. Was there anything else within that I've missed, Chairman?
Good question. So there was a comment about would we need to commission a renewable energy strategy. There was also about allocation of land, was it, for allocation of land for energy generation outside of our boundaries?
That's it. Thank you, Chairman, you reminded me. I don't envisage the local plan being the vehicle for a renewable energy strategy. I think that's probably a far more corporate type document, which would obviously planning would have a part to play in that in terms of land take and land use allocations if it was deemed necessary. But to my mind, a strategy would be something quite different from the local plan. And again, I take the point, we have a duty to cooperate with our neighbours on strategic planning issues. One of the strategic planning issues most likely is energy generation going forward, sustainable energy generation going forward. slight tangent, but under our duty to cooperate, we have to prepare something called a statement of common ground with Dorset Council to show the government when we get to examination on local plans how we have engaged together. One of those elements of that statement, from recollection, is actually on energy generation. So there will be something within that document that talks about how we've dealt with each other on that strategic cross-boundary issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. If I could just ask you, when you're sort of reflecting after the meeting, if you get an opportunity to look through those bullet points, and then when it comes to the next local working group, if you could just make sure that they've been addressed for Councillor Slade. Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The document looks very good, but I'm concerned that there are errors in it which are not going to get picked up. And one particular instance I've come across is in Christchurch, obviously, where you clearly refer to the police station as a potential new allocation. Well, we agonised twice now to try and get planning permission, and I've got planning permission for the police station site. It's gone through, it's done and dusted as far as I'm concerned. And yet this document refers to it as a potential. Now, there was already enough grief in the local community about the site in the first place, so I don't want this to open up another can of worms that this will set hairs racing if there are errors in it. The other point I wanted to make was that it's clearly got, I think it's the Roshot Hill development as an existing planning permission, whereas my understanding, and Councillor Dedman will correct me, is that it's outline planning permission only. There's no specific plans, there's no specific planning permission been granted for that site. It's just outline, and therefore, how would you distinguish between that outline planning permission and a real planning permission for houses, etc.? But Councillor Broadhead, you referred to getting spades in the ground and getting houses built. Well, the police station site is exactly that. Spades are waiting to be dug, and yet the final ticks in the boxes haven't been granted, and that's months and months and months after planning permission was granted.
Councillor Broadhead.
Yes. Look. I mean, everything's a potential site until it's been built. I think that's the angle that the officer team that has put this together, or the sites that have been promoted for us, have been based on. So one hopes, and I would completely agree with Councillor Cox, that any existing sites that have planning permission to build homes, we all want to see get on with. But clearly, until they're built, they're just potential sites. So I think it's just the wording of that rather than anything else. I don't think it's any deeper. And again, I think it's probably a wording issue with the difference between outline planning permission and full planning permission as well, unless I'm corrected elsewhere by officers. Mr. Axford may have more.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, go on then, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we've probably put Magistrates Court as potential because when we wrote that, it was still subject to a Section 106 agreement to be signed off. So until that's signed off, the planning permission isn't actually issued. And the same goes for Roshot Hill. That does have a planning permission. The outline is actually a planning permission. Okay, it does need reserved matters granted, but the outline does in effect give it that planning permission per se. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much. I take Councillor Cox's point here because a bit of misinformation, not accurate information, can get things hairs running, maybe unnecessarily. And you know how the sensitivities of some of these sites, it is important that what's in the consultation document is accurate at the point at which the document is issued. All I would just ask for is if we could just double check and run through the sites that are there just to make sure it does reflect the current status. Councillor Cox wanted to come back. Thank you.
I appreciate everything you said, and I'm sure legally it may be entirely accurate. However, from a resident's perspective, that is incredibly confusing, where you have a site with outline planning permission in Brown as existing planning permission, and then a site where you have effectively gone through massive amounts of procedures to get some homes built in the centre of Christchurch, and just because you haven't ticked the last box or two, it's now suddenly a potential. That is massively confusing to the ordinary Joe public. Yeah, you may understand it and I may understand it, but I'm afraid 99.9% of people will not.
Okay, I think the point's well made, Councillor Cox. Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's a well put together document, but I think there's a major gap in it, which it relates to creativity and culture. There is a line saying, creating a vibrant city region, digital and cultural-led transformation. And there is a reference to the expansion of Talbot Village and related businesses and educational facilities related to the universities. But there is nothing about a more general push to establish and strengthen the creative industries in the area. There was a report a couple of years ago saying that the Bournemouth, well, it's actually the whole BCP region, was one of the fastest area in the country, I think, in terms of creative industries. The report says a lot about tourism and how we should we want more tourist facilities. I'd question that, actually, but you know, unless they're kind of wet weather facilities, which are probably going to be targeted more to the cultural end of things. But I would ask whether the cultural action group or the successor group of cultural partners have been consulted in this, because the cultural action group report set out the need for specific cultural quarters to be created in Bournemouth, Poole, and I think Boscombe as well, and there's no reference to that, and it seems to me to be a lack of appreciation that to move to a more prosperous, dynamic area, certain key infrastructure elements need to be addressed in relation to supporting the creative industries and the people that work in them. Related to that, it says in the description about Poole, in the regeneration section, which I can't scroll through to, but it refers to Poole as being of maritime and military significance. Definitely, it's not really got military significance in its history. Much more, it should be about artisanship. It's famous for Poole pottery, for tile making, for boat building, and that's what we should be pushing culturally, in terms of helping to promote that area. So I'd advise that the word military be changed to artisan. Finally, I would say in response to health and well-being, there's a lack of reference to creating new indoor community spaces. It's a reference to maintaining existing community facilities, but a lot of those facilities are aged and not fit for purpose, and there's a reference to creating outdoor community space, but the really difficult thing to do, which is to provide high quality indoor community space for people to meet, that's conveniently missing from the picture. So I just conclude by asking who we should send our comments to in relation to the working group. Would that be Councillor Brooke, or is there an officer that we should direct our request for items to be covered to? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Before I say which direction I think that question should come through, I think Councillor Broadhead would like to give you the opportunity to just come back on what Councillor Howell has just said.
I think Mark Axford may have something to say as well, so I don't know whether you want to hear from Mark first and then I can mop up.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, councillors. Yeah, I think first comment is to make that on the types of industry that BCP will be accommodating over the coming years. Again, because of COVID, Brexit, and various other large events we've had recently, we haven't yet commissioned, or rather we're just about to commission, something called a workspace strategy. and that will begin to analyse growth industries. So it may well be creative industries or the future growth industry. We're really keen to understand what that means in terms of land take. For many years, we've had this, we will be an office-based employer across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. Will that still be the case going forward, for example? So just basic point, we are doing more work which will inform the next iteration of the local plan on workspace needs. In terms of the quarters, we have engaged with the cultural action group through this, and in particular on our retail and leisure study as well. So there's actually another piece of evidence which we're preparing, retail and leisure evidence base, which begins to talk about those types of initiatives. But maybe it is something we haven't really picked up on through the working group, I don't think, on these types of quarters. Maybe there's something in there in the chapter on the regeneration of the town centres we can have a think about. And I understand what you're saying about the artisanship of Poole rather than maybe a military reference. I think that's something, Chairman, for the ONS working group, maybe, probably not for myself, but to consider. And again, point on health and well-being, no reference to new space, but there are some, again, it's quite a high level document, this, isn't it? But it's something we will have to consider as we prepare the submission draft, to my mind. And if there's evidence, we actually need new communities. I'll leave it there, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Broadhead.
Yeah, just final point to underline from me what that last point that Mark has quite eloquently put across. We'd said at the beginning this is a high-level consultation document about the issues and opportunities that we'll have to do as part of a local plan. It's not our plan for the whole area. The narrative's important, and I think we've got to frame that in, as broadly speaking, the correct way. I'd slightly disagree with Councillor Howell. Even within the Poole Town Centre bit, it talks about having the largest arts venue outside of London in the Lighthouse Centre for the Arts. So we do put those kind of cultural and art points within there. But fundamentally, as Mark has pointed out, we've got a tremendous amount of work to do in the next phase, which will be the strategy phase, where we've got to actually put policy into place, which unleashes all of that. As I'd said right at the beginning, Chairman, you can only do that if you listen to the public about some of the very broad choices that you've got to make, and that's what this document is doing. But hard to disagree with many of the points that have come out today, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Broadhead. I mean, I think you could get a different view from thousands of different people of what should be in this consultation document, and each time it's presented, you'll get, and that's exactly what will happen with the consultation. But having said that, we do have a cultural compact. There's been a lot of emphasis on creativity and importance of it to society in our towns. And if there is a lack of focus in terms of infrastructure and supporting the creative industries, if it's not in there, maybe it should be. All I can say is that probably the best way forward is for, if I could ask the chair of the local working group to look into those issues at its meeting, and if they feel there's some enhancements could be applied to the document before it's issued, then let's do it. It's easy to miss certain things that are really important to some people, and I thank Councillor Howell for bringing that up, because it is really an important issue in terms of supporting the cultural industries, because it's about quality of life for all of us, as is the well-being issue in terms of having adequate facilities to support the well-being of our residents. And I accept that some elements of it has been addressed, but I think it's just worth checking and making sure we have got the focus in those areas that maybe we're a bit short on at the moment. So I think if you're happy to leave it with the working group, Councillor Howell, and maybe you could liaise with the chairman too on that.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy with that. I just wanted to, should an officer be copied for documentary purposes, or is it sufficient just to email the?
I think if you email it to the chair, and I would copy it into Mr. Axford as well, actually. Thank you very much. So, members, I think we've probably, discussed this as far as we can go now, but we do, oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Edwards. Oh dear, don't upset my ward colleague.
Thank you, Chair. Now, you can call me a bit cynical about consultation, loads of them. Now, what I'd like to know is how are you going to get the public confidence on your side that their views will be taken into account on this?
So, Councillor Broadhead, how will you do that?
Well, I'm a very nice person, so I hope that they'll just believe me. No, I think it's the important thing is, and this is why I'm just reflecting on your last comment about the cultural bits, which I completely agree with, and it is going to be part of the next phase. But we've been quite broad with some of these areas precisely so that we can get a steer from people, because if we come out of that with a very, very strong view from the public on certain things, I think the way that we have the confidence is then to pay attention to that and put that into the actual policies that we put together. I think the other part is precisely the point that we talked about earlier on about the consultation process itself. If you just put something out there and say, here's the local plan, let us know what you think, and that's it, then understandably the public are going to think, oh, I see what this is. This is another one of those, or it's a kind of a nod to, it's one of the things I've got to do along the list. If we do something that's really intensive, really creative, and Mark Axford has talked about a kind of a series of webinars which we'll look at doing, kind of frequently asked questions, delving into the issue, so that if somebody emailed any one of us and say, so what's going on about the green belt in the local plan, you can say, well, here's a webinar where it tells you what the issues we're dealing with, what the feedback's been, the issues that we're going to have to be strategizing. Then the public can see that you are listening to them. So I actually think the act of a decent consultation is as important as anything else to show that you are listening to people. But as I've said right at the very beginning, we have to, at the end of this process, come up with a local plan that's at the inspection. And we will have to demonstrate not only that we've come up with a plan that ticks the government boxes, but we've got the evidence to be able to do that. And part of that will be to show that it's not only what is needed on the ground, but it's what people want as well. So I think we can absolutely do that. But Dorset have just demonstrated the level of response that you can get. So I'm looking forward to the process.
Thank you. You can thank you. Okay, so we've got to come down to the recommendations now. Now, I think I heard you say earlier on, Councillor Broadhead, we could basically remove recommendation B and replace it with the recommendation that came from the working group. Am I right?
I don't. The actual recommendation that came from the working group is. Yeah, I think there's a middle version, which is to take B as it currently stands and to weave a set of words in there, making particular reference to a commitment to come back to liaise with the working group once the report, the housing needs assessment, has come in prior to publication. So it's probably a hybrid version of the two, or alternatively, if you're happy just to, as a scrutiny board, just accept the recommendation that's come through from the local plan working group, I can then give you the commitment that I will be changing the recommendation when it comes to cabinet, whichever's your preference.
Okay, well, members, I'll ask members what their view on that is. It would be inappropriate, I think, for me to just say that would be okay. So, Councillor Cox.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I would just take what the working group has suggested. I would propose that we just take the recommendation of the working group.
Okay, the Councillor Cox, did you get that, Councillor Broadhead? He would prefer for the wording that's coming from the local plan working group to prevail, if you like.
Chairman, I agree, and that will give us the ability to make sure that the recommendation that comes out of cabinet is one that does the job rather than trying to come up with it on the fly. Completely agree.
Okay, so I think you're accepting then that the local plan working group recommendations can. I think you're saying that the local working group recommendation can replace recommendation B in your paper.
Not quite. I think
No,
Councillor Cox's suggestion was that he was proposing that the Scrutiny Board accept that recommendation to go to Cabinet, and then I'll make a commitment to change B to reflect it.
Okay.
We recommend it. I was proposing that we you know, it's part of our recommendation for changing it so that it goes to Cabinet. That's what I was suggesting. Yeah.
Sorry, can you just, Councillor Slade, could you just repeat what you've just?
Yeah, I think Councillor Cox was just saying the opposite. Councillor Cox was suggesting that we take the recommendation from the working group under 3.3, page 62, and that we actually use that recommendation as either a replacement to B or as an additional recommendation on the Cabinet paper. I think that's what you were saying, wasn't it, Councillor Cox?
Yeah, how do you feel about having an additional recommendation as recommended by the working group, Councillor Broadhead?
Look, I'm pretty sanguine about this. The only thing I want to make sure with officers is, you know, that I can take the wording and then it needs changing. So if the recommendation is that we should commit that Cabinet will not go to authorise or delegate the changes and then go to consultation whilst doing the working group, then I can weave that into a revised recommendation B. I just don't know whether the recommendation as it stands is a replacement for B or not. So it's going to work its way in there. Just how, I'm not quite sure.
Okay, Councillor Slade.
Yeah, looking at the wording of the recommendation on page 62 is very, very specific to the housing needs assessment document. So for me, if you look at the recommendations on the Cabinet paper on page 64, one is that Cabinet approves it to go out for consultation, A. Then there should be a second recommendation that says, but not until this has happened. And then the third recommendation is that the Cabinet delegate authority ahead of planning with portfolio holders to make minor changes necessary. So for me, it doesn't replace B, it sits as a A2. But I think it's really important that we vote on it, it's actually accepted, and that it is the recommendation. I'm sure that in the same way as I make my comments as a critical friend to Councillor Broadhead, I'm sure he takes this in the spirit with which it's bent. But I think it's really important that he doesn't have to interpret what we meant when we have a recommendation before us from the working group that we all think is quite a good recommendation. So why not put it in, and then Cabinet can either accept it or reject it. Not the portfolio holder promised to take it forward, and then it may not be interpreted quite rightly. We have a written recommendation. I propose we ask for it to go as A(2).
Sorry, Councillor Slade, I think we've got recommendations A, B, and we would have C. And what you're saying is
Well, this could be C, or you might feel that because it needs to be done in a particular order, that you might want to put it as A(2), or you can put it as C. That's I'm content for you to decide.
okay, but and I thought we might come into some difficulty with this particular one, I have to say, and because I didn't think, I was uncertain whether the portfolio holder could actually agree to substitute the recommendation of the working group straight into this paper, and he clearly doesn't want to do that. I don't think there's any argument about recommendation A.
To come as a recommendation and this board. That into decisions.
Okay.
So I think it's just fine to have it as the recommendation.
Okay. What? Okay, and leave.
And it's up to how they want to.
And just leave their paper as it is.
Yeah. As long as there's a clear recommendation that's come from ONS, then that's fine, rather than leaving it for the portfolio holder to interpret.
Chairman, can I just clarify that then that recommendation would be that which is outlined in the report from the local plan working group?
I believe it would be, but we need to make sure that this meeting, first of all, does support that as a group. So what we'll do is, before we move into that, we will just clarify that at the agenda item 7, the recommendations made in the working group paper, that we, that's supported. There are actually a number of things in there. Would somebody like to propose and second that?
I'm happy to propose that we adopt the 2 recommendations from the working party in item 7. One is a removal of the word city, and the second is the very long recommendation, but I suspect we're going to have to vote on them separately.
Okay, we've got any seconders for
Yes,
those two?
Happy to second, Chair.
Which?
I thought we were doing both, but the first then.
Well, let's do them one at a time. Let's do the city thing first. So you're content that the recommendation regarding the city removal of the city?
Yes,
wording.
I'm seconding that if Councillor Slade is proposing that we.
I am happy to propose them as 2 separate votes.
Because this was, Chairman, if you remember, this was where I didn't realise that we were going to vote now. I thought we were going to vote before. So.
I do. Okay. So is there any debate about that motion in terms of removing? No. Okay. Any dissent from that motion? Yeah, I'm talking about the word city.
Yeah,
all those in favour.
I'm comfortable to use the word in there because the towns are separate entities. There's no reason why we can't be towns and also be a city region. I just think it's just an argument about words and things that point to it. So I'm happy to just leave it in.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a vote on this then. All those in favour or for the motion to remove? Those against? Sorry, I beg your pardon. Could you just put your hands up, those 4 again?
Sorry, 7 in favour, thank you.
7 in favour. Those against? Those abstaining? Thank you. And Councillor Slade proposed
the second recommendation, which is the very long one on page 3.3, page 62, which I think we can read for ourselves. And I think Councillor Devon was happy to second that one as well.
Yes, very happy to second that.
Thank you. Does anybody want to comment on those motions before we put it to the vote? Okay, those for the motion. Sorry, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarity. You mentioned earlier on that I was less comfortable with doing it this way. The only reason of that is that, as Councillor Slade will no doubt know, cabinet wording for recommendations has to be quite strict. So I know I'd had conversation suggestion that I think the words cabinet should await and things like that are things that we can't quite do in a formal sense. So I'm absolutely comfortable of getting the result in some order. My just recommendation was that I would incorporate it, but that was it. It wasn't that I wanted to do it my way. Just I didn't want to get tripped up by process.
Yeah, no, understood, Councillor Broadhead. But we made the recommendation as it's set out in paper. Then the cabinet can do what it chooses with that recommendation. So, members, those for the move. Those against? Any abstentions?
No, I'm going to keep the video off, so don't worry about that.
I think that then deals with that. But
so then we're not. So then we aren't making any to the recommendations to the main paper.
So just going back then to agenda item 8, has anybody got anything further they'd like to say about that? given that the recommendations are set out in the paper go forward, Councillor Broadhead and the Cabinet will take on board the recommendations that we've just made, and they can decide that at the Cabinet meeting. Okay? All right, the members, will move on. Thank you. I thought that was going to be hard work. So now we come on to agenda item 9.
Do we need to formally confirm that those 2 recommendations were passed from item 7? Because I know Claire announced the numbers, but you didn't. Yeah. Okay. Didn't record whether the motion was passed.
Oh, did I not? Okay. Well, can you do that? Because they both were.
Thank you, Chairman. Yep, just to confirm that for the first motion, there were 7 in favour, 3 against, 2 abstentions, and that was agreed. And the second motion, there were 9 in favour with 3 abstentions, so that was also agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Slay, for keeping me on my toes. Agenda item 9, scrutiny of environmental cleaning and waste related Cabinet reports, Council Highway Inspection Policy. I think I'll just open this up and allow Councillor Mark Anderson to introduce the paper. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Basically, the purpose of this paper is to harmonise the inspection policy through the conurbation and ensure we meet our responsibilities in line with code of practice, well-managed highway infrastructure. It's also to allow the county infrastructure in a serviceable and safe condition. What it's not about is network changes, new infrastructure or resurfacing. Also, it's worth noting the changes in the code of practice away from the measurement-based intervention to risk-based. This allows inspectors to take into account local conditions. It's also useful if you want to have a look at it. The risk matrix is shown on page 8 of the policy. Inspections are carried out depending on the asset, monthly, quarterly or yearly. And at any one time, there are between 750 and 1,000 repair tasks in the system. And as items come in, all these are reprioritised to make sure that the ones that are at most risk get dealt with first. I'd also like to say that there are a whole raft of different reporting methods, but I would like to encourage everyone to use the online reporting tool because it's the fastest method of getting items into the system for inspection. And as we go into transformation, I would like to, and I hope that members of the public will also be able to see information about the repair as it happens. So that will give us a better feedback for them. And finally, I just wanted to mention that what the risks are for not accepting this policy. And it's failure to adopt a highway inspection policy will compromise BCP Council's statutory defence. Section 58 of the Highways Act 1980 states that a statutory defence against third-party claims is provided where the Highway Authority can establish that reasonable care has been taken to secure that part of the highway to which the action relates to a level commensurate with the volume of ordinary traffic such that it was not dangerous to the traffic. I just thought it's useful that we are aware of that. So that's the paper, Chairman. I'm hand back to you for any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Members, Councillor Earl, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Anderson, for answering my first question, which was really about the statutory implications and how much how far they go, but that's great. I do have another question though, which is really to get a bit more information about flooding after the weather we had last week, which meant obviously some residents' homes got flooded, and I think as climate change becomes more obvious to us, a big part of that is going to be the inclement weather. So when I was reading about the network hierarchy, it tends to focus on how important to the network places are. So on this risk-based approach, looking at things like whether it's an A road or a high street. But I wanted to ask more about intersectionality based on the importance of not just the network flow, but also based on the likelihood of risks such as flooding. And along the same lines, I want to ask about reactive inspections based on incoming weather. So, for example, if the forecast says we're going to have copious amounts of rain, is there a protocol to check those flood risk spots prior to the storm, and to check things like drains are unblocked and gullies are clear, because it's very much based on, that ability to check twice, every other month or so. But I wanted to find out if it's a bit more responsive.
Chairman.
Yes.
I'll say a few words on this, but I think it's fairly complex, so I think I would call on Mr. Legg to answer the question fully. I'd say that we've added extra gully cleansing equipment. We purchased a new gully cleanser, so we've increased the size by 25% of the gully cleansing equipment. We also have two areas that are involved in flooding. That's the FSERM as well as environment. The FSERM are the people who liaise with the Wessex Water over the flooding and the capacity issues of the network, which is where the gullies flow into. So they're those two halves. So I would urge anyone that has been flooded to make sure that the flooding manager in the FSERM, which is Stephen Hill, I think he is a new officer just come in, and I can let you know, Chairman, for your minutes afterwards. But he is the guy to let everyone know, so everyone can let them know about the fact that they've been flooded. He will keep a record of whether it's gone into your house, whether it's your garden, what the state of it was, and anything else. And he is the person that will work with Wessex to ensure that that prevention action is taken in increasing the size of the drains or whatever. But apart from that, I think it's best if I ask Simon to talk about the other parts, which are very much environment based. Simon?
Simon Legg. Just to follow up on the drainage and gully scheduling. This is a separate schedule of activity away from the highway inspections, and they're undertaken to a separate frequency. Just for everybody's benefit, we believe there are somewhere between sort of 58 and 70,000 drainage gullies across BCP, and we have capacity to empty a third to half of those on an annual basis. So it's quite a big task. Some of those are quite complex because they can involve lane closures or other activity on the network to facilitate that happening. With regard to storm warnings, we are in receipt of Met Office weather warnings, advice from the Environment Agency, so that all does come into us. We do have some known across the town, which we will try to target in advance of bad weather. As Councillor Anderson pointed, these are capacity issues. So in the case of some of the recent storms of last Monday, the gullies were operating, but sufficient capacity in the network. But yeah, just to reassure, there is a separate schedule of activity for gully emptying, and our highway inspectors, when they're carrying out their work, also do seek to identify those which are causing additional problems. Thank you.
Councillor Earl. Okay, thank you. Members, anybody else? Okay, all right, I've got a question. Okay, I noted that the under special inspections, the white line inspection is reactive only. I just don't understand how white line inspections can be reactive. Does that mean reactive to complaints from residents or something else? Thank you.
Simon, can you respond on this one?
Yes, thank you. The white lines are inspected visually by our highway inspectors, and they will raise works and identify tasks. The additional piece of about special surveys identified there was to do with where we've, and this is the first time we've done this year, is our lining contractors do what they refer to as a retroreflectivity survey. So they will use a special device attached to a vehicle that looks for how roofs are, and that's something they would do at night. So that survey's just been completed, and I'm wading through the results of that at the current time.
Okay, so can I just follow up with that then? And when are the white lines actually inspected? As part of the condition survey that's done on the highways themselves?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so they are. they're inspected as part of the highway inspector's schedule of activity, so annually, quarterly, monthly, and they will use the risk matrix to assess that. The retroreflective survey is a separate piece of work undertaken by our lining contractor.
Thank you very much. Members, anyone else? Councillor Dedman.
Well, it's a question about, I think it's on your report, page 29. And I may, as I sometimes do, be missing totally the point of it. It's about defective signs which are missing, illegible, damaged. I'm only thinking that when Christchurch was under the county council, we wanted, or the councillors, one of which was me, wanted to clean some of the signs. And I'm talking about when you go up Christchurch bypass, there's a massive sign which is absolutely filthy. So I think it would come under obscured. And somebody has attempted to clean it, I think with a broom. So half of it's done and half of it isn't. I wondered whether we, BCP now, have a different policy, because at county and at the borough, we were told, no, don't you touch those signs because you'll have to have special washing stuff. And so I'm only interested in whether, because they're only a category 3, but they do look awful, what can we do anything about it, or do we wait till we have some money and we go along and clean the signs, with the highways officers? So that was really my question, Chairman.
Thank you. So you want to come in, Councillor Anderson, or is that one for your officers?
Well, I would say that as part of the Safer, Cleaner, Greener strategy, we are looking at putting some money in for cleaning signs. We're also, as part of the highways inspection, looking at recording where the signs are dirty and the state signs, so we can get an accurate measure of which signs need to be done.
Does that answer your question?
So Chairman, can I take from that then the very cheerful news that we might be having our signs cleaned in, well, maybe the near future, not quite so near future, but you will be doing them?
Yes. Councillor Anderson seems to have a wry smile on his face, and I'm wondering what the answer is going to be to this one.
Chairman, we are going to be looking initially at the resilient network signs rather than all the signs. So yes, the answer is yes and no.
Oh, sorry, Chairman, can I just come back then? That is a no, though, to the councillors actually getting a mop and broom and cleaning it ourselves. It's really the question I had.
It's at the moment it's no. We need to know how many signs we've got. So once we've worked out how many signs we've got, then we can look at how much we need to spend on doing it. And councillors can't go out and do it because on the sign you're talking about, it's on the resilient network, so it's on a high-speed road. So we have safety implications. So yes, we'd like to do it. No, you can't do it. And finally, we have to work out how many signs we've got, so we can look at how much it's going to cost to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Anybody else? Councillor Slade?
Thank you. Sinkholes, they seem to be becoming more common. I know we've had several in our ward just in the last few weeks, and I'm wondering whether there is a pattern of them becoming more common, or is that just unlucky that we're getting loads? And if sinkholes are becoming something that's more of a problem going forward, do we have to change anything to reflect the risk of sinkholes? My first question. Second one is, I'm not convinced about the inspection routine, particularly of footpaths and cycleways, in terms of things being overgrown. I'm constantly being contacted by people who are saying that footpaths and cycleways are just not passable unless you want to get completely covered in brambles. It doesn't feel like they're being treated in the same way as a pothole on a road. And actually they could cause just as much damage, if not more harm, to someone who's trying to pass on a cycleway. So I just wondered if you could comment on whether really this is enough, for, especially if we're trying to get more people on their bikes and walking. And finally, you talk about highway defects and property owners. there is a real issue, and I've raised this before because I asked for it to be something that was considered in planning policy. There's a real issue with pavements being ruined by people who are having works done to their house, because the heavy lorry will come down on the pavement and put those big clamps down to stop the lorry falling over. But there doesn't really seem to be an awful lot of enforcement around getting somebody to repair or replace the bit of pavement outside the house where the work's been done. Obviously, if it's a big new development, you'd expect that whole area to be redone. But on more domestic stuff, I think the pavements are wrecked through, you know, incremental works on homes. I just wonder whether there was any thoughts about it making that a little bit more robust. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Chairman, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask Mr. Legg to respond. These are some fairly technical questions. Certainly, the ones about the paths and footways are down to best practice, and I'm sure Mr. Legg can give you a lot more detailed response than I can.
Thank you, Mr. Legg.
Thank you. I think there's three issues there I picked up on. The first one about sinkholes. I'm not aware of any sort of change in the frequency of those occurring. They do seem slightly random. Some of them are naturally occurring. Others are a result of sometimes failures in the sinkholes will potentially appear days, weeks, or sometimes months later. And I think there's a couple that we're dealing with at the current time. The issue with cycleways and the condition of and vegetation is an interesting and newish issue, not a new problem, but we're attempting to address this differently in this inspection policy, where there is a greater emphasis on the inspectors walking parts of the network, whereas in the past that would have been perhaps driven in a vehicle. So they are seeing and picking up more of these issues themselves now. The issue with some developer damage, I think I may have picked up on this one previously. It can be quite a challenge identifying not just who the developer is, but who the delivery company was, because often you end up being pushed around from pillar to post trying to identify who actually did the damage. There are examples where developers do come back to us and wish to reinstate paths afterwards, and they fund that. There are examples where that doesn't happen. We have an increasingly improving relationship with the highway enforcement team, and where we can, we'll work with them to try and tackle some of these issues, but it's by no means perfect, and I'll be honest about that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Legg. It's really good news to hear that there is a greater emphasis on the walking inspections for pavements, and because this is the common complaint from residents about the condition of pavements and overhanging branches and all the rest of it. So I think we all can identify with that. I'll be right with you. Councillor Edwards, you wanted to come in next.
Thank you, Chair. We've had some issues in our ward recently with painting of lines, and that there just wasn't enough staff, or you didn't have a line contractor who painted the lines. Are we now fully staffed? Because there are quite a few lines that do need repainting around the conurbation.
I believe we have a contractor that's in to do the lines. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, Simon.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yes, it's not a task we undertake with our own staff, or all except for maybe one or 2 meters of work, sort of as reinstatement works. The bulk of this work is done by a contractor. We appointed a new company in May of this year. That they're far more receptive to work and churning out work much faster than the previous provider. There's a massive amount of lining to do around BCP, and all 3 legacy authorities tackled that, did or didn't do with these things in different ways. And so with the inspectors, they're starting to identify more work, and with the lining survey, hopefully this year we would do more than we have in previous seasons.
Yeah, that's really good news, Mr. Legg. Councillor Devon.
It was only to pick up on the point about footpaths and overhanging bits and pieces, that certainly in Christchurch, we've got the Town Council and the Parish Council of Highcliffe who feed in that information, which the ward councillors often do, but you can't walk, well, I personally can't walk the whole of my ward. So that's, I hope that's information that the portfolio holder will be receiving. And it's very useful. I found it very useful anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got another question, and that relates to the integration of the various systems that the highways teams from the 3 previous local authorities had. Are you now in a position to have an integrated highway management system that is common to all parts of the conurbation? Is that something you're working towards? And if something you're working towards, when is that likely to happen? Thank you.
It's something we're working towards. I believe we have a common system in Poole and Christchurch, and we're looking to integrate Bournemouth into the system. I don't know, there are some contractual reasons why we haven't got Bournemouth into the system yet. I don't know if Mr. Legg wanted to add anything further to that.
Yes, a bit of movement on that one. Actually, we have now successfully integrated the highway inspectors onto a single system. There are other legacy systems that the 2 teams are still using, such as incoming inquiries from different CRM systems, but the actual day-to-day inspections, we have now successfully got them onto a single system so they can see each other's work and share work and knowledge.
Can I just come back on that then? So I'm assuming that there will be a plan to come up with a common system for the whole of the area, so that coming into one contact place and the reports are accessed in one place, all the records are in one place, etc.
This is one of the reasons why I mentioned about the Report It, Chairman, in my opening remarks. The Report It tool puts the information straight into the system. Mr. Legg, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. Yes. We still have 3 routes in based on the legacy authority websites. They do channel to the right people. It's clean as we would like, but yeah, the aspiration is to get all this information to one place and hopefully share information back with people that are reporting defects, so they can have regular updates on statuses.
All right, thank you. Any more members? Okay, I think we've come to the end of that discussion. It looks like we're content with the report. Can I thank you very much for presenting it to us, Mark? Although I think you're going to be available for the next one.
But I'm being joined. I'm being joined.
Oh, are you? Is Mr. Legg staying with us for the next session?
Mr. Legg, Mr. Powell, and Ms. Waite are joining us, and Councillor Green is also joining us.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on then, members, to the next item, which was road maintenance across the BCP area, and this followed a request for scrutiny by a councillor, and it was Councillor Trent, who's here with us today. Thank you. And we did, as you know, and the paper reflects this, we did set out a number of questions that were answered by officers, but the Overview and Scrutiny Board never had an opportunity to discuss those of the Overview and Scrutiny. And those questions have all been set out and are pretty well comprehensively answered. But there are additional items I think Councillor Trent wanted to address. So I think probably it would be better for Councillor Trent to bring him in and sort of lead the debate from the areas that he wished to cover. Thank you. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I think there are just so many areas that I would wish to cover, but I'm trying to be a little bit tight on it. The last item actually was very interesting because it mentioned things like the desirability of reporting. Well, just a week ago, I dealt with a bit of case where someone reported something in Report It, got a case number. I went through, because I didn't know who the latest contact was, via the councillor Report It system. they made inquiries and the report wasn't even on the system. So the resident reported it, nothing happened. They got in touch with me and it turned out that the report wasn't even on the system. And it's now been sorted, and hopefully the work of which you've actually got a photograph of one of the issues that I raised in the ones that I sent over the last few days. There were issues that I've raised, and I'm hoping that we're getting past the worst of it now, where the methods employed to do work, the work seemed to be done down to a price, and the contractors did a very poor quality work, and there are examples of that in footway work, which I provided you with over the last 24 hours, where a footway was resurfaced basically on top of weeds, twigs or anything there. They didn't actually bother to prepare the pavement. They just put a tar slurry over whatever was there, and which didn't set very long. And I provide you with some examples in, I think, the most recent posting, where I found some photographs that I took within weeks of the work being done, and you could see twigs and weeds underneath the tar. There was a particular contractor doing these works that there were four roads in the area I represent that generated complaint. Two of the roads were completely redone. One was partially redone, and fortunately under guarantee. Fourth one was never touched again, although it looks like someone might have had a little poke at one of the aspects of it. So a lot of it is about the methods employed that we use and whether they are up to standard or whether they're a false economy, and also what appears to be the lack of a post-inspection thing. I was concerned to hear in the last little bit that drainage will be done, will be looked at once a year if you're lucky. And unfortunately, that is totally unsatisfactory. I think this is one of these areas where we need to, and you know, in my opinion, it needs a working group or something. It should be looked at bit by bit. The inspection, it's interesting hearing that there will be a new sort of integrated inspection system. It would be lovely to have the inspections actually integrated, recorded, and then sort of passed out again. But at one time, I know that Paul was looking at having area inspection teams. In fact, I think Street Services was introduced to provide inspections over a geographical area. There was still work left over from that going on back in the early days of BCP when I got back, and we had in-state inspections with, well, it ended up basically poor housing partnership because we were actually looking at the council estates, but it would bring up things like road failures and so on. There wasn't really any useful feedback as to what anyone did with the report. The reports were passed on. So there's a lot involved, and I do hope that members have looked at the pictures I've emailed. We had another issue where I gave photographic examples of one road which never actually made the urgency list for making up, although it's a bus route. residents are regularly complaining about it and why hasn't it been done. This time last year, there was an adjacent road that was to be done, which didn't look as bad, although it did have quite severe undulations. So there was obviously something sinking underneath. That dropped from the scheme when all of the road schemes over the whole conurbation were sort of included in a matrix. Again, I think that it's unfortunate that Poole appeared to have been ahead of the game on road maintenance, although it didn't seem like that to a lot of residents. And the roads that were being attended to there have now taken a back seat to some even worse roads in Bournemouth. So I think there's more questions than answers on this, and you know, I do think it would be useful to look at this whole subject area, pull it to pieces, and monitor some of the things which we were given information today. I think that will need monitoring to see how it's working and whether it's actually achieving what it sets out to do. As I say, it's always difficult at a time of change to do an absolute scrutiny on something because you're scrutinising a moving target. But I'm still quite convinced that the adequacy of work that's being done and the quality of work that's being done is sufficiently poor for it to require attention over the next year or two. And you know, obviously any kind of scrutiny working group would have to be slotted in, and you've got a list of ones that would keep you going for the next year or so. Anyway, I'll leave it up to others to discuss where we can take this. Because certainly my inbox hasn't quietened down on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trent. There's a number of points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's at least 8 or 9 specific points that you've raised there, but the last one that you made is probably the main one, where you said that you believe that the adequacy and sufficiency of the road maintenance is still poor and requires the attention of more oversight by members, effectively. And I think that if you were to sum it up, that's probably your last point, is your main concern. Would that summary be correct?
Yeah, I think it's true, because although I've shared specific examples of areas that went wrong in the ward I represent, it isn't about specific roads, although I'm sure there are people out there that would love to haul someone over the coal over a particular road that they're worried about, but it's about the system that has allowed things to go. One perfect example, and we were talking about drainage, and I'm assuming it must have been last Monday's wet weather that made someone sort of contact me, but I shared a photograph of the drain. We actually looked at it, reported it on site with an officer in attendance over a year ago, and it was pretty bad then. 1 year later, and there's trees growing out of this drain, and yet one of the roads was the resurfacing had gone wrong, so the resurfacing was redone. Which, if you look at the photograph I took from the car windscreen, you can see the darker surface on the right-hand side of that photograph. That was redone. Somebody obviously repainted the double yellow lines over the new tarmac, and just about 3 or 4 foot away was this block drain sprouting trees. So there is a lack of joined up action and thinking in all of this, and I do think that we need to work through it and see whether things can be improved. You know, it'd save a lot of money. It would also make life easier for those actually doing the work as well. You know, things could be tightened up.
Okay, I think we'll ask. I think we'll ask Councillor Anderson to make a response. I mean, you know, are the methods employed a false economy because they're costing more money in the long run by not doing it properly in the first place? You know, is the road maintenance system failing and not adequate and not fit for purpose, Councillor Anderson? You know, there's fairly far-reaching conclusions reached here with a whole range of specific examples quoted by Councillor Trent. You know, but you know, let's have your view on it before we decide if there's anything more we need to look at.
Chairman, I haven't seen the specific examples as I wasn't included on that email. So I don't proceed prepared to say anything on those. I would take issue about the highway inspection policy, as I've just gone through and explained it to everyone. And I do think that the highway inspection policy is a very fair and a very appropriate policy for going around and checking everything with the council. In fact, part of the work that I discovered when I was reading through the policy and getting to grips with it was the amount of inspections that the highway inspectors do on other areas that they report back in the system. I don't know if to say something on this, but I would personally just hand over to the officers because I think that's the most appropriate way.
Okay, before I do that, let's go to Councillor Green. Thank you.
Yeah, just very briefly, if I may, Chairman. I think we all recognise that there are times when we are concerned about specific items within our wards, but I think what sort of surprises me is that we've just had the full presentation from Councillor Anderson and the officers. Only in March we had a further presentation, and the whole of the highways asset management inspection policy was brought forward to this Overview and Scrutiny Board before it then went on from there. It has again been explained within the answers that have come to the board for this meeting, and indeed most of those answers I think came in February. The answer about whether it is adequate and whether it is correct to be inspecting at this sort of frequency and in the way that we are is asked, and it has been answered by government. We have been required, as all authorities are, to put forward our asset management policies, our asset management strategy for highways, and if government is satisfied with that, with the way that we are doing it, then we receive money towards it, and if they are not satisfied, then we do not receive that amount of money. They have given us a clean bill of health. So I am disappointed, to say the least, I think, that Councillor Trent isn't items within the strategy, he isn't stressing the items within the policy, and he isn't addressing the answers that have been given to him to those specific questions. To start talking about a flooding item in the floods that we had last week, the exceptional floods, it's hardly surprising that there will be some difficulties, as there were right the way across the region. So let's look carefully, again, if required, at that strategy, at that policy. We can revisit completely that same meeting as we held in March, but no matter how many times we are asked, those answers are still the same, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry to be vehement about this, Chairman, but I really think that we are going round in circles on this.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Members, I'm going to open this up to a bit more debate now. Anybody? Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I'd just like to take Councillor Green up on that last remark, because we're going around in circles because nothing's been done. And nothing's improving in terms of road maintenance. It's pretty shoddy from what I gather, and I do declare an interest. My family is a firm of road maintenance specialists, but up north, so it's not necessarily something I need to declare. But I do know a bit about road maintenance, and actually the amount of road maintenance that gets done in BCP is pretty shoddy. and the roads are a disgrace in many respects. And I appreciate that Councillor Green is following the government guidelines, but government guidelines are usually the pretty bare minimum that you have to do. And actually, we should be expecting more and demanding more from the people that we spend our money with. And for you to just turn around and say, oh, we have the right policies, we have the right procedures. Well, you may well do, but the roads are pretty awful. And until they start improving, then nothing. Until you start taking an interest in what people are complaining about, then they will stay the same.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Anderson or Councillor Green?
I will hand over to Councillor Green in a second. I just wanted to come back about the highways side. I'd just like to reiterate to Councillor Cox that 25% increase in the gully cleansing operation has taken place since we took control, and that money and that equipment has been spent exclusively in purchasing a gully cleaner for Christchurch. I just thought it's quite useful to make that point. I don't know if Councillor Green wants to say anything in addition.
Councillor Green?
Yes, if I may, Chairman, and again, I'm going to sound cross in this way because I am. Is it the SCRIM condition assessment that you're not happy with? Is it the scanner? Is it the MRM? Is it any of the others that are listed in the paper? Is it any of the policy that we went through? I said it was taken by your board, Chairman. We went through it. It is not a case that the government has obviously the government does have some minimum standards, but it also has various ways of looking at it to say that we are, and various amounts that will be handed to councils depending on the quality. And we are at the highest level of that quality of the inspection strategy. We are looking at a network which is old. We are looking at services which have been in place for a long time in many cases. But what we then need to do is to go through and ensure that they are at an adequate condition. That is what the strategy does. That is what the policy does. And I'm afraid, although there may be people who are experts in their own fields, etc., when the survey says that it's in inadequate condition, and when the survey says that road A needs to be done before road B, could we put an unlimited amount of money into this, or almost unlimited amount of money? Of course, you can always put money into them. You can always say, well, okay, that's probably going to fail within the next 10 years, so I won't wait another 5 to replace it. But it is going to cost an awful lot of money to do so. As far as the accusations that the inspection regime isn't tight enough, or that the quality of work isn't being controlled, I think I would just plain reject that. And I think I've probably said enough, and it is now time to bring officers in if Councillor Anderson doesn't want to continue on that one. Thank you.
Councillor, you contend that the reporting system for defects is adequate and that repairs are effective in a timely way and to a quality that is acceptable to you?
I think that one does need to go towards to Councillor Anderson, because I'm responsible for the policy and the strategy, etc. But the reactive maintenance comes under Councillor Anderson, so I won't try to put words in his mouth on that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the point that I would first of all like to make is to build on what Councillor Green said, which was we're not talking about a gold-plated service. What I said in my opening remarks and what has been said in the report is on highways inspection is the purpose is to seek to maintain pre-existing infrastructure in a serviceable and safe condition. As Councillor Green said, we're not looking at a road that we've been told is going to fail in 10 years' time and fixing it now. We're looking at maintaining that road as long as we can until we're in a position to fix it before it fails. We're not going to be looking at rebuilding every road we've got. And where you talk about the reporting system, I would say that it's a bit clunky. It works. I'd like to see it better. And that's what we're working towards using the transformation process. I'd like to see that move faster, but it's moving forward. I don't have any timescale on that, and I think at that point, I think, as Councillor Green has said, we should we'll hand over to officers. I don't know if Gary Powell or Mr. Powell would like to start off.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Did you want to respond to any of the issues that have been raised by Councillor Trent? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think, I've picked up sort of 4 main points that Councillor Trent's made. One we've already covered, which is about the reporting. Another question was around inspections over a geographical area, and I'll let on to that in a moment. In terms of poor quality of work, when by our own teams or by contractors, I can assure councillors that those works are inspected. Where we have a contract in place, there is a defect period. So there's a minimum of 12 months where if there's a defect that's been identified due to the material used or the poor workmanship, then that will be picked up and back to fix that defect at their own expense. Question around, is it value for money, the way that we're doing these things? The answer is yes, because it is built into the contracts that the expense of making good poor workmanship is on the contractor. In terms of prioritisation for structural maintenance, I think again this goes back to the policy and the strategy which Councillor Green has already mentioned, and the use of terming, which roads are prioritised first. I think I'll just hand over to Mr. Legg, and I don't know if Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Legg.
Thank you. If I just cover the looking, yeah, our highway inspectors in Poole do still work with their colleagues in the street scene model, with colleagues alongside them in parks and cleansing. Similar but slightly different arrangement at Southcote Road, where people are all based in the same depot, long established relationships of sharing information and working together. And our inspector who started work over in Christchurch also bases himself out of the Grange Road depot. So again, has solid working relationships with his colleagues in the parks team there. So slightly different legacy arrangements, but good sharing information where possible between staff members.
Thank you. Was there someone else that you said that may wish to speak, Councillor Addison? Lynn Waite, was it?
Yes, Chairman. I would just also add that if you wanted an example of a road that had to be resurfaced by the contractor, I will give you Wellington Road, which you probably know quite well, which was done in the East Springboard and East Cliff ward, and they had to come back and resurface it at their own expense. But it's Lynn Waite, we thought would probably like to say a few words as well, so I'll hand over to Lynn.
Yeah, I also had one in my ward where the contractors had to come back and do it again at their cost. So I'm aware that they are brought back in occasionally. Yeah, Ms. Lynn Waite, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and councillors. I think that the only thing that I can add really to what's been said is just to advise that the contractors that we appoint to do these surfacing treatments, we appoint those using a framework contract that has been set up by Dorset Council that we have access to, and that's procurements. That's their preferred route to market for those, and part of the qualification for contractors to get onto that list is to demonstrate that they've got experience in a particular process. So we're not just it's an approved list of contractors that we're going to. And I suppose just one further thing for Councillor Trent, the new slurry was laid over some debris on the footway. We have got a list, a defects list in place with that contractor, and as soon as they can arrange, obviously they're working over the last 12 months, they've had various resourcing issues, so as soon as they can, they have a list of defects to attend to, and those particular issues are on that list. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So members, we've heard a whole broad range of concerns. We've had the responses from officers. now to you. If, you know, does anybody else want to join the debate with further issues? Because I mean, what Councillor Trent is saying, that the issues are severe enough to warrant further monitoring by the Overview and Scrutiny Board. That's what he's saying. But bear in mind that we do have already two areas that we have yet to address, both through enforcement and what was the other one, trees. That's another area that we've agreed that we need to set a working group to address. This would be another area of work if you agreed it was necessary. But I think the first question is if we as a group do believe that we need to set up a working group to address these issues. Now, I don't think it's any question that, you know, we've all got issues with roads in our wards, and they're certainly, I can say that, you know, the complete absence of white lines in some areas, I'm almost wondering why we even bother putting them down there. Because and the cost of putting them back again is probably huge, and the benefit they get from it. Of course, I do understand there's a legal requirement on what you're required to do, but it just makes you wonder sometimes if it's worth doing all that stuff. But anyway, you know, is it so bad that we need to introduce some additional monitoring by this group? Councillor Gabriel.
Oh, sorry.
Was she?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of a question as well. And I agree. We've had so many issues where there's, you know, the main one being potholes, along with weeds and all sorts on our highways and our roads. So I really sympathise with Councillor Trent. We've certainly noticed the same in our area. My question maybe for the portfolio holder here is, now we've got the new policy in place, do you think things will improve with harmonisation? Or do you think that it's harmonisation and that's it? It should just be the same service going ahead? Like, so, because if it's not going to improve, then I think we do have a responsibility to bring it back. But if it is with this policy, then it might be a time to give it it might be worth giving it a bit more time to see if there are improvements and then bringing it back here maybe in 6 months or a year.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fair call. Councillor Anderson, would you like to comment on that?
Actually, Chairman, I will pass it over to Councillor Green because he is the guy who gets the money.
Councillor Green, you've got all the money apparently. Would you like to answer this?
The policy, the policy that we introduced in March and came through this board, update policy. I mean, obviously, you've just heard some more details from Councillor Anderson this afternoon, and you have a lot more information than this goes through. The policies that were the policy that came forward in March was much more about harmonisation and just about, but pretty much every policy of the preceding councils was very, very similar. So do I see a step change? Absolutely not. Do I believe results from the sort of increase in, for example, gully cleansing that Councillor Anderson outlined before? Yes, I do think that that will help. But it's just a case of whether more money is spent on it or whether more money is not spent on it. You know, these are decisions that get taken when we go through the budget process as a council, which again would be scrutinised obviously by this board. And if there is a requirement, which as we've heard from Councillor Anderson, we've already put in with the for this year for increased spend, then that's something that we'll be able to forward with the budget process. But is this a step change in the way that the new policy has come in? No, it certainly isn't.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I mean, is there a system of review of the number of reports from the public? You know, when work is done, when it's completed. You know, is it monitored by any particular committee or group, or you know, it's like a highways committee or something? Does anybody ever look at what's happening overall and when programs are due to be implemented, and or potholes filled or whatever, or how many or how often, how quickly? I guess there's some KPIs there somewhere that we would review.
There absolutely are. I mean, obviously, because you've got the two of us on, it's a bit difficult to work out who should say it. But we as Councillor Anderson in this case has access to the information about how quickly potholes are filled, whether they're coming through on 7-day notices, how many are 28-day notices. In general, these will be delegated decisions, and certainly from my experience, I'm happy with the way that officers are carrying out those duties, and I believe that they are doing them diligently. I believe that they're doing it well, and I believe that within the budget that's available for them, we are getting a very good service.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Slade.
Yeah, thank you for raising the point about the length of time taken to fill potholes and things. So that's really interesting. I remember going back a year or so or more when we brought the performance report to Scrutiny, and we talked about making the performance reports more meaningful. Now we've got that on the agenda later on, but one of the things we actually talked about that the Scrutiny board at the time wanted to see on performance was how many potholes we're filling, how quickly are we filling. We wanted that sort of information as part of the performance reports. So I'm just wondering whether, in view of what Councillor Earle has suggested about monitoring it and coming back on it in 6 or 12 months' time, but also in view of the changing nature of vehicles, the increasing number of e-scooters, e-bikes, and more people using bikes, electric vehicles, I understand, are heavier and they have different sort of impact on the road, whether actually we should ask for some more data to look at when we bring this back. And actually, I'm just interested to know, is there any reason why those sorts of figures aren't on the performance report? Because I'm sure you're not attending the performance, but I just wondered, I thought that was something we talked about adding last year.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's on the corporate performance review in terms of highway repairs, but it may well be there. I'm not sure. Councillor Anderson.
Chairman, I think it might be quite difficult to give you a report on the number of potholes that are filled, just on the basis that you've just had a policy come through on the highways inspection, which says we've changed from measuring the to taking the risk to using a risk-based method. So a pothole outside an infant school may well have a higher risk factor than a pothole that's in the middle of I don't know, some rural road. So we can't give you a list that says, we've done so many potholes this week, we've done so many potholes last week, because it would depend on whether they are high risk potholes or low risk potholes, whether they're potholes that could be left for 28 days. If you look at the highways inspection report, you'll see that on page 8 we do have the matrix that explains how we calculate a risk against the response time. I don't know if Mr. Legg would like to add anything about specific potholes, etc. on this, but that would be my comment. Mr. Legg.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. It's a new one for us. We're drawing all this information together from legacy systems, from Paul Christchurch and Bournemouth, putting all that into one single pot, single place. So in time, again, it's a bit like making information publicly available. Lots more of this data will be at our fingertips. We're just not there yet. I can probably give you feedback on individual cases, but given them on the collective, I know how many potholes we've had in the last 12 months. I can't individually tell you how quickly we've filled each one yet, but all that data will be available in the longer term.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Because I'd like to draw this to a close now, because we've only got 30 minutes and we'll be starting again. Councillor Gabriel.
Hi, but not just a general point that I've noticed that's come up a few times through this afternoon's discussions is about the reported system. I think some of the officers have said as well that it's a bit clunky. I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from our residents and from councillors, that you don't often get the feedback of what's happening with that issue, what the timelines are. I think if we can actually resolve that, that will link in to what Councillor Trent was saying, so we would know exactly what was going on with issues. I mean, I've been just literally using the reported system at the moment to report a minor issue in my ward. It is clunky, it does take time, and trying to get feedback on what's happening is difficult. And I think if we can get that right, which I'm sure we will in the future, I think that will alleviate a lot of people's concerns.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In fact, it's not just highways, it's virtually every area of customer service and the reporting that customers make, and they get frustrated with sometimes the lack of response that they get. From the debate so far, it doesn't appear that there is a huge appetite to form a local working group, I would suggest. We've heard the portfolio holder describe how he recognises a bit clunky in places, but they are working towards improving it. There's a recognition of the need to bring the existing systems together to improve it, and there's an expectation that is going to improve. So I think at the moment, what I would suggest is to individual ward members, keep raising these things, and where there's dissatisfaction, then flag it up, and by all means bring it back to as individuals, bring it back to this board if that's what you want. But I don't think that there's overwhelming evidence to take on a working group at this time. That's my view. And if members are generally content with that view, then I'd like to close this debate at this time. Members? It seems that we have a consensus on that. So I think we will close this debate. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Thank you, Councillor Green. You can go and spend some of your money now. And
already doing it, Steve. Already doing it.
And thank you, officers, for the work that you've put into this item. And thank you, Councillor Trent, for all the work that you've put into it too, because you have brought a lot of issues there, which I think are worth of note. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I think have we now come to the end of this agenda? I believe that we have.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll now close the meeting and we'll see you back here at 6 o'clock. Thank you.